I can't have your will tempered by feelings of regret or compassion. You were brought into being to lead. Therefore, you must see every living thing as nothing more than a tool to elevate you. uh,
The climate begins to shift, Darth Sidious. The body politic begins to show signs of contagion. The re-emergence of anger, hatred, and fear signal a loss of faith.
It started raining as you were reading this. It's
Oh
pounding
God!
outside.
Thunder and lightning.
Yeah.
The light is
Yeah.
waning, pushed into retreat by dark matter, and the universe begins to seem inimical rather than comforting. In such times, beings are wont to look for solutions in the enactment of harsh laws, the ostracism of strangers, and warfare. Once the Republic has fallen, the Jedi are but a memory, and beings have nowhere to turn to but us. We will provide them with a sense of stability and order, a list of enemies, weapons capable of decimating entire star systems, durasteel prisons in which they can feel secure. He gestured to the courtyard. Look how they hunger for the dark. I mean, I listened to that today and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Can we not? Can we
Like we're
steer
saying-
away from that,
Yeah.
please, people? Can
Like
we
were saying
wake
about,
up?
history repeats.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and welcome back to Fanalysis Star Wars. I'm Callan, this is Matt,
Hey, everybody. Welcome back.
and this is Evan.
Greetings.
Today, talking about chapters 12 through 15 of Plagueis, continuing with the rest of the book. We're probably going to end up going through the entirety of it, even though that wasn't our original intention. But I'm still enjoying it if you guys
at
are.
this rate, might as
Yeah.
well.
I mean, I silently kind of like just resigned myself to that a while back. I didn't tell you guys that, but and also I've seen several comments wanting us to just do it, and at this point we may as well. And clearly we might take like a year or something to finish it, but people are okay with that, I guess.
They're
Because
not
this
used
is
to
the
it with us
series
by
in
now,
which we
they
kind of
should be.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
because
it's one of those works that you can like dive into because it touches on so many facets of the overall lore. There's something to say in just about every chapter. Period.
it's a unique book. It's a really unique book, and the chapters we're looking at today are sort of like name drop central for like pretty much every other story that concerned the Force that existed prior to this publication. But yeah, I mean the book I think is also like kind of uniquely worthy of going over it with like a fine tooth comb because it's full of like interesting ideas, some of which you might not think are good per se, but are still interesting. We'll talk about a little of that today as well. But also just the use of language, the unique blend and like just breadth and scope of everything. It's just like I've said in the past, we'll never get another book like this. So yeah, for the people who want us to go through everything, you will get it, but you have to be a little bit patient. Sorry about that. But anyway, let's chip at some more of it today. So we're starting with chapter 12. It's called Seduced by the Dark Side of the Force. That's the chapter title. And the reason why we're doing 12 through 15 is I really want to do 12 through 14, to be honest, because that's sort of the narrative arc of that is Palpatine's training, basically, both in the netherworld of the Force under Plagueis and also in sort of like the political dimension. He's kind of he's ambassador, I think, at this point in the story. He's certainly not senator because his mentor has that job, but I think his title is ambassador. And so initially I thought we'd do these chapters because that's Palpatine's sort of nascent. He's kind of rising slowly. He's still young and everything, got a lot to learn, but he's making steps. He's ascending.
Marinating.
And then, yes, marinating. There we go. Then I went through 15 and I thought this is a weird ass chapter and I would rather conclude on a chapter like that than begin the next series of discussions with that. So that's the reason why we tossed in 15 into the bunch. But so 15 is the most weird chapter. We'll get to that. So chapter 12, that concludes on the jump between like the initial days of Sith training to being like a very experienced Sith apprentice, but still not politically occupying the space that they need him to. Yeah, and so that chapter is like killing a bunch of birds with one stone. So like that's what that one's about. And then yeah, so there's a really strong thematic tie binding the initial chapters here. Chapter 15 is a mess. We'll talk about that in a bit. But there's good stuff in it. But anyway, so let's get started with chapter 12, Seduced by the Dark Side of the Force.
Well, I mean, overall, getting this perspective as Plagueis as a teacher, like you see from the get-go, I guess you could say his particular flavor of Sith teachings. Him bringing him to Megiddo is I really do like that in the sense of like tying it to his own past and how previously in the book, they establish how unique his upbringing was and how he uses the lessons he learned in that harsh environment to inform his own style of Sith training. But at the same time, he even says to Palpatine, like, one of the reasons I'm bringing you here is because as a human, you're not as adept at surviving in this environment as I would be.
The only
But
reason, yeah.
but if you were a species that was acclimatized to this, I would bring you, somewhere where it's hot or somewhere where it's, the gravity's, much harsher, that sort of thing. And it does tie back to other aspects of the lore, the harshness that Plagueis, always leads with, but at the same time, he also mentions like, yes, I'm going to be your torturer, but ultimately I want you to be a partner. Whether or not that's, true, and that does kind of highlight his hypocrisy later on in the book. But
And his
again,
blinding
you see the
optimism.
early stage exactly. You see the early stages of that, and that the way that that's set up is all really nice. And you could also see how it sort of informs Sidious's own style of Sith doctrine later in life, particularly when he trains Maul, which does actually make an appearance in this set of chapters in its own way, which we'll get to. But again, all of that, I like how the generations flow from one to the next as it's set up.
You mentioned the start of the kind of lack of, well, there's 2 points there that I want to talk about. One, the lack of comfort aspect in the fact that he's bringing him to this environment to kind of push his limitations and try and just kind of stretch him within the dark side of the Force, etc. I like that because it speaks to one of the kind of more true aspects of Sith philosophy, the fact that they are striving through adversity. It's one of the only kind of pieces of it where you can almost see the kind of admiration for the kind of mentality towards it. It's everything else that pushes past that when they lead into everything
Why
else.
almost?
Well,
why almost?
Because
if you put it just in that
in that context, it's everything that comes after it. Like in isolation, if that's all they were, strength through adversity, then that's fine. It's more on the Mandalorian kind of way. But it's everything that takes you that step past that and brings them towards the actual true core of true core of Sith philosophy, which is the selfishness. It's the one thing that delineates them from the Jedi, really. In hard terms, they are selfish. The Jedi are selfless. That's the kind of the distinction between the two. Obviously, there are exceptions on both sides, but that's the kernel of the philosophies. But the bit I like in terms of the prose, well, not so much in the prose, but the content of the story as well, is how it's framed. He uses he specifically calls out the fact that this was a planet that has sentimental or at least historical connection to me. But that's not what I brought you here. I brought you here for this reason. I like the implication there where he's kind of teaching the lesson of what matters and what doesn't from the mentality of him personally, if not the larger Sith as a whole. The sentiment, the emotion, the connection doesn't matter. What matters is the adversity you get from it. And I happen to be bringing you here. I could have brought you to another planet, but this is the one we've gone for. It's cold adversity, cold pragmatism, cold reality that I need to kind of sit you in and steep you in for now.
Yeah.
Literally, yeah.
That's my favorite bit as well, for sure. I actually like the scene setting as a whole. I think that that's really strong in each of these, well, the training chapters. I won't say like when you get into like chapter 15, which I have issues with. But it starts off with the line, it says, "The obedient orphan stood shivering in swirling snow. Around him rose ice pinnacles shaped like jagged teeth, excuse me. A glacial wind howled through them. Plagueis stood nearby, flakes of snow and ice gyrating around him, but never lighting on him, melting before they reached him." That is you know what Palpatine is dressed in, right? And it's like it's a survival suit, really. And this guy, the snow is not just like lighting upon him and he's okay with it. It's not caking on his shoulders or whatever. It isn't touching him. It's melting before it gets to him. He's like radiating power casually. And so he can go on this sort of almost pretentious, kind of soliloquy, about like what it is to be a thing of the dark side and, all that. And he earns his stripes or whatever. Like you can tell he's put like the hard work in to get here, because Palpatine has already like murdered an entire starship of people with like zero training, and he's dying here. This guy, he's got that power contained. It's like the burning candle or something that won't go out in the snow. There's something kind of creepy about that. Yeah. It's like it's really, really cool, and I can see that as like a film
Mhm.
shot. You know what I mean? Like a film still almost.
Made more
I
powerful by
just
the
think
fact
it's
that he's
really
facing
strong.
away as well, the detachment, the kind of
Mhm.
Mhm.
not disinterest, but the kind of disconnect where he's like, I'm so above you, I'm so aware, so capable that I don't even have to give you my attention. This is all carefully calculated, both in the writing terms and in the characters' terms, to kind of
Mhm.
maximize that aggravation towards Sidious and kind of get that kind of the steeping hatred, and all while calmly. So I'm encouraging this. I'm saying to feel this. So you have my permission to feel this, which kind of takes the satisfaction out of it for Sidious. And it's all about the kind of power dynamic between the two, and
Mhm.
and kind of bringing out the strengths and powers that will help Sidious generate the strength he needs to progress and to advance as a Sith without in Plagueis' mind at least, without polluting it and twisting it and making it too much of a hate dynamic this early in the
Mhm.
in the in the relationship. I think it's really
Yeah,
clever and
and it
really artfully kind of portrayed there
Yeah.
in the style of Plagueis as well. It fits both characters' kind of dimensions quite nicely.
like add on to that, it's like little shorthand too for the progress that each of them are in terms of their development, like you were saying, like uh, Palpatine's behind him looking at Plague as he sees what that energy that he is radiating and the differences in their composure in that moment. It's a good visual shorthand for this is where Palpatine is and Plagueis is where he wants to be
Mhm.
ultimately.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
that sort of that like you were saying, Matt, the description you could the environment, yes, the harshness is there on both circumstances, but only one is affected because they have, that level of mastery, which is, again, if this were a storyboard, you could see the difference then and there. So
Like the
that's all
scene
Yeah.
very
work
nice.
in Batman Begins, you can just kind of visualize a more darker, sinister version of that
Yeah.
with the ice kind of background and everything.
It's also
Mhm.
the kind of thing that it's in fairness, it's to George Lucas. I mean, I don't mean to dog on him all the time. This is a little easier to get across in a book. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Because the language can direct your attention where you want it to go to like the harshness of the environment. But I just feel like that's what I wanted to see more of is like the actual war, because when you see Mundi dying here, or like initially just leading his forces here, it doesn't really feel like he's that bothered by the location he's on. But like, how powerful would it be if you understood what the Jedi have been dealing with for years
Mm.
for a thankless galaxy, and then that's the end of them. It's
Mhm.
a fairly powerful beat the way that he did it, mostly because of the music. It's not a badly done scene like Order 66, but I mean, it's just I feel like it could have really earned just so much more, but if you got to see more of it in the films, like more of the actual core story rather than pod
Mhm.
races and whatever the hell we were doing,
Right.
fooling around with bugs on Geonosis and stuff. But yeah, it's really really powerful use of the language. I like when he says, I meant to say earlier, I don't think I did, that these chapters 12 and 13 in particular, I imagine he spent a disproportionate amount of time, the author Lucino, I mean, writing these compared to other chapters, because the use of language, the the sheer amount of different scenarios they're put in to make a different point. Uh, he's a great author anyway, and he's very creative and everything. But this just feels like so dialed in to me, despite like the grandeur of the language. It
Mm.
really feels like he was proud of this and wanted to put like his best foot forward, and maybe even had to fight to keep some of it in if it might have seemed a bit repetitious to maybe an editor or something. It feels like a passion project to me, like these couple of chapters in particular.
It's very Star
But I
Wars
like
as
when he
well in
says,
terms of the necessity of it.
mhm,
This is something that has to
yeah,
Mhm.
be here to properly cement the early dimension of the two characters and the relationship between them. The master and apprentice. This is the kind of this is the character stuff that people will have carried over in their minds from what was brought forward with the Bane series. This is the
yeah,
Mhm.
we need to kind of really buy these two as a partnership, at least
mhm,
in face only, in name only,
Right.
to really carry through the rest of the book. So it's the kind of fulcrum in which the plot's going to hang, and the story on top
But
of that.
Good. But at the same time, like Plagueis in this chapter even refers to himself as, his Sidious's torturer.
Mm.
That
torturer,
is
yeah,
what he will be in this, scenario. And I also like, again, with the use of language, the fact that he keeps referring to the dark side taking an interest in Sidious. I like that.
yeah,
I like that sort of like somewhat personalization. Like he's referring to the dark side as this almost like this living entity that's like
Mm.
watching over them right now. kind of adds that extra layer of like, you're not just here to impress me, like you're here to impress the dark side itself.
Yeah,
Like,
the
so
courtship kind
you
of
get the
thing.
sense of no matter what you do here, in front of me, if the dark side doesn't, approve of it, then none of this matters at all. And I like how it adds that, like I saying, that extra layer of what Sidious needs to do to prove himself in that moment. There's this definitely this like otherworldly feeling to it that I think comes across really well. You could almost imagine this like black void hanging above them, and possibly literally, given Megiddo's climate, just looking down on Sidious as if he's just so small right now, even though he thinks he can do so much.
And there's a few aspects throughout these chapters that kind of highlights and focuses in on the piece of Plagueis and Sith lore. I mean, we've mentioned it before in this book reviews, but there's a kind of contradiction with how he sees the world and how he expresses his thoughts to Sidious, and the dark side is this beast that needs to be harnessed and shackled, but it never can be, and we have to kind of tempt it in and let it into ourselves while also dominating it with it, and let your power come from within, don't draw it from the exterior, but also we have to reach out to this creature. There's a lot of I think like Matt said, how these chapters have been intentionally crafted. I think there's an intentional intermixing of those contradictions and trying to make it into something that actually kind of fits the characters in both their own individual ways. I think that was really strong for me, because usually that kind of contradiction makes it fall flat, and it never did here. For me, it was like, no, this is a character that understands the kind of nuanced complexities of the art that he's talking about, and particularly given the fact that he is first and foremost for us by this stage in the story a scientist, and kind of cosmic manipulator at this point. I like that we get that angle, kind of tap into the fact that this is kind of a nebulous, just nebulous, like complex issue for they have to tackle. There's a darkness and an unknowability to this kind of power that you kind of really need to express to have all these guys, everything these guys are saying, really kind of take flight and be properly enjoyable. Otherwise, it's all just a bunch of kind of mumbo jumbo.
I'm just gonna like read this like short bit, like that success doesn't come from summoning help from the force, but from taking control of it and generating the power from within yourself. So, I was just following up from what Callan said, that sort of that general contradiction, but at the same time, the point that he's trying to make in the sense and differentiating between what he's doing with Sidious and, what we would consider more traditional like Jedi methods. Because you could like in this moment, yes, Sidious does in many ways, I mean, always in most cases succeed in drawing from the Force, but he's not doing it in the quote unquote Sith way. And that's what ultimately, causes, Plagueis to step in and say that line right there.
While all the way saying, don't draw from the exterior power, but I'm going to bait the exterior power towards you, like an external force. Saying we're not drawing it from it, we're drawing it towards us. Is that kind of that really interesting kind of dynamic that gets played out in this chapter.
I think it's I think he sometimes, like I've said in the past, it's not always clear to me whether he's talking himself through something he already believes or whether he's talking himself through his own thought process and arriving at a conclusion. So, sometimes it can feel a little bit like he's got a little bit in both hands, but it does feel to me like I just appreciate the author's skill, because so much of this could be airy-fairy fluff, like what are you even saying?
Yeah, exactly.
And some of it,
magical stuff that just doesn't have any of the flavor and depth that you need to really sell the Star Wars mythos.
Yeah, right. But he really he grounds your attention, like in the initial salvo of this, like when he I won't read the whole bit, but when he says it was on this world that I first became aware of my force powers and dark impulses. Compared with temperate Munilist, my Gita is ruthless and uncompromising, but I learned to adapt to its harsh conditions, and before the age of 8, I could venture out into the most violent storm dressed in less than you wear now. So that is sort of like he didn't have any real training at that point. I don't think. I can't remember whether they said that he'd the age at which Tenebris formally took control of his life, basically from his parents, but I feel like it was perhaps after that, or at the very least around the same time. And so you want to give yourself credit for an achievement like that, and at the same time you're understanding that it is the power of the Force that enables you to do that. It's the only thing that differentiates you from every other living being, and it's just the difference in the way that like Jedi talk of it. But Jedi feel this on some level, or they think it, because they always defer to Yoda, for example, in this era. Like Yoda's more powerful. Like they don't always say that way, but that is a big piece of what makes him who he is. They don't just talk about his wisdom or his experience or his goodness. his strength in the Force that they defer to. So it's kind of like just because you mentioned the seeming contrast or maybe even contradiction between like is the power coming from within or from without, and it's sort of both, you know, like that's the cool thing about the Force, and kind of wrestling with those notions. I don't think every author is good at, you know, I don't think every author is as has a natural, rather yeah, I don't think any author I can no one comes to mind is particularly bad at it, but nobody's as naturally gifted at it as a few select authors, you know what I mean? And he's one of them. Like so the
Both
way
in
that he's
putting the
expressing
logical
that there.
ideas together, but also in how you express them artfully, you know, making them
Yeah.
engaging, and also engaging through the character's perspective in particular. You know, this is a book that would not work if any other character had been taking lead in it. You know,
Yeah.
as we talk about with the
Right.
differences in flavor between the first and second halves of these two, when Sidious kind of starts to take the reign more. This book is a Plagueis. You know, it's made for Plagueis. You know, as it should be
Yes.
given the title.
This initial
Very
portion of the
powerful.
book as well, because then the reins, the baton gets handed off to
Yeah.
Sidious in a way that is appropriate, but I at least find something a little bit lacking after that point, because I love just the tone of all things Plagueis, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that initial bit terminates on the point. It goes on to mention the things Evan covered already, like if you had been like an aquatic being, I'd have stranded you on dry land, not here necessarily. It just happens to be that this is terrible for humans, so I brought you here, and it's my homeworld, right?
Right.
But it terminates on the line. The divide between the ways of the forces practiced by the Sith and the Jedi has less to do with the distinction between darkness or the presence of light than between, in your case, naked cold and the presence of warmth, between distress and comfort, entropy and predictability. And then it comes to the lecture, I think, it's not a lecture. That's the next line, right? The next bit of it that Evan already teed up, where he says, "But this isn't a lecture, nor should you think of it as physical conditioning. We need instead to prepare you for what awaits you should the dark side opt to take an interest in you. The commingling of fear and joy, of being humbled and empowered, of being escalated while at the same time used, as if an instrument, to be singled out and yet subsumed by overarching grandness." So it is like walking that tightrope, you know what I mean? Like what are we saying we are, and how okay with how okay with it are we? You know what I mean? Of surrendering ourselves to this, because they don't ever want to call it that. Like
No.
he says that we don't surrender to its enigmatic whims later. You know, so it's like, and at the same time, it's I like that he just did it here with like an instrument. He mentioned earlier movements in the symphony that is the grand plan in an earlier chapter. I like the ideas of music in this kind of because like once the instruments stop playing anything, the music's gone. Like there isn't really like a room for like true silence. There's got to be, you know, a continuation, and it feels like a constant musical piece, like a dance that doesn't ever stop ending. I really like the way that he expresses all of this. It's really, really cool. He kind of says, to wrap this particular one up, he goes, "I can't have your will tempered by feelings of regret or compassion. You were brought into being to lead. Therefore, you must see every living thing as nothing more than a tool to elevate you." To move you to your destined place. This is our galaxy. There's not a lot of room for "our" in most of these like kinds of scenes. There's usually "my."
Yeah.
You know, this is our galaxy, Sidious, our reality. And then I like that the author, there's a break. Like he's still speaking, but there's a break in it to underscore the next line. It stands alone from the paragraph. It says, "In this pitiless place, your power is forged." So it's sort of like, to me, it just makes sense of the whole scene. You know what I mean? Like this is why I've brought you here, and it feels to me like what I've just introduced you to. This swirling storm, like this unforgiving, you know, this raging. It's not an inferno; it's a blizzard, right? This is forever. Like this is what it is to be a Sith, like a true Sith. Like you're going to be existing in this forever. It's just like me with the melting snow. You become okay with it, and that's the difference in his mind between what they are and weakling Jedi. You know, so you don't need to agree with it, but it's a perfect analogy. You know, it's a perfect metaphor. You know, it's a perfect painting that he's just like put out there. So I think it's one of the most perfect scenes that he has in here among a group of pretty good ones. You know, but
Agreed.
anyway,
Yeah, and then when it kind of moves into, Sidious's, training in that moment, the harshness, the struggle, but also the hunger that he has, the persistence that he keeps, going through this, the way it's portrayed, you immediately get a sense of like I said, what he's working towards. And he's constantly asking, Plagueis, like, what are my strengths? How long?
Mhm.
When can I have? Like, you get this. Like, it's basically him saying, "When can I have what you have?" And
Mm.
Plagueis clearly sees it, but at the same time, he's like, we need to temper this because this is what you need to get from where you're at to where I'm at. And whether or not you can say he's underestimating him, not only his hunger but also his potential, that's up for debate. But at the same time, I like the crescendo at the end of this where he finally gives a direct answer and he says, along the lines of, not a single day, less than a decade. The way that it
Yeah.
cut. You could just imagine if this was a TV show, like him raising the lightsaber, like bringing it down
Oh,
right
yeah.
before the
Yeah,
credits roll.
for sure.
Very thematic, and I think that's an excellent, bridge point between this and the time skip we get in the next chapter. It's very well handled.
Cute off-page montage moment
Yes.
kind of thing. It's like
Pretty
Blair
much,
comes
Yeah, yeah,
down, like the
yeah.
10 years pass, and
That is
okay.
yeah.
what it is. It's a
Mm,
perfect scene end, yeah. But
exactly.
it's like I like the lines leading up to that where he talks about this is why the Sith, embrace the dark from the start, focusing on the acquisition of power. We make no excuses. The actions of a Sith begin from the self and flow outward, as you were saying earlier, Callan.
Mm,
We stalk the Force like hunters, and then we get a scene like that,
mm,
Yeah.
But I mean, it's too early for Palpatine to do it. Rather than surrender to the prey of its enigmatic whims. That's almost a Kreia line, like hating that the Force has power over you or
mm,
has that you're in any way controlled or dominated by it, like to any degree whatsoever. And at the same time, he's understanding, like again, the music. Sometimes you have to give into it and let it
Mhm.
push you and propel you, and you can't accomplish anything without its cooperation. Is his point? You know what
Right.
I mean? You need that. You need to forge that partnership. Um, and
Mhm.
then he
Well,
also,
like
like later on in there, he says like to talk about what you guys were saying a bit ago with the dynamic between him and Palpatine. He says the urge to kill one's superior is intrinsic to the nature of our enterprise, which is like uh,
He's so
just such a
blind.
funny.
It's
very
he's so
Yeah,
clinical.
yeah,
I mean,
blind. It's
for his like
hilarious.
yeah.
mathematic business way of thinking, I mean, he does very much view the Jedi and Sith dynamic as like a
I
business
think
acquisition and,
It's
and
that
all of that.
cord.
So it's a very like Mune way of like viewing
Yeah,
the whole
that's what I was
thing.
about to say. It's that cordiality and that formality, that aspect of him perceiving a kind of set of rules that aren't broken in larger society that he thinks applies to the universe around him effectively. Like he thinks, okay, because I'm outlying, I've always grown up in this position of power, this position of absolute dominance within my society as a whole, but also within the business franchise and in the underworld and everything. The world has always revolved around me. So if I lay the foundation of these are the rules to Palpatine, he will operate in the same way because everyone always has. And
I
and
told
and
you this
I'm
is how it works.
yeah, exactly. This is
Right?
how it works. So listen to me, right? And
Uh-huh.
he doesn't.
Yeah.
We talked about it before. How he's kind of he doesn't really obey his own philosophy when it comes to viewing fate.
Hmm.
He sort of believes
Hmm.
in fate without
He
ever
thinks he's an
admitting it.
exception to
Yeah,
everything. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
It is
Right.
that. It is the exceptionism. He thinks I'm the exception to all of the rules that I clearly understand and I'm explaining to people who will then accept them. And that leads to this gaping chasm of blindness in the fact that, of course, Palpatine agrees with me. Of course, I think this is a good idea. Therefore, he thinks it's a good idea. And even in he believes that wholeheartedly in the same breath that he's saying, "So Palpatine, this is how it's always been before, and this is why it's so important to everything we are. But we're not going to do this one part of it, okay? And for these other reasons that I'm stating that have absolutely no relevance to
Yeah.
what comes before, purely because I say so." And it's hilarious to me that he's that way. And it's well written as well. It's not a flaw. It's a character
It's
flaw, but not
very,
a
yeah,
writing
yeah.
flaw.
No, exactly.
I just want to make that very
I was
clear.
just gonna
It's
point
Deliberately
that out.
fascinating capturing that.
intrinsic to the character.
Yeah.
I was just going to point that out. This particular bit is part of a pretty lengthy paragraph in which, like, the first half of that is kind of what we were just speaking to. It's all
Mm.
based around that line, which he builds out from it. He says, "My unassailable strength gives rise to your envy. My wisdom fuels your desire. My achievements incite your craving." And when he talks about like the urge to kill one's superior is intrinsic to the nature of our enterprise, talking about Mune culture, the business world, finance, Sith nature, it's also sort of Oedipal. Like you want to kill
Mm.
your father, and take his place, kind of. And it seems like that's sort of his take on it. Like you were saying, that's the remove there. Is I'm just telling you that this is this is the way the pattern dictates things, but we rise above it, right? We're better
Mm.
than that. We're not,
Right.
but he
Well,
thinks so,
Sidious, isn't
you know? Yeah,
it?
Right.
yeah. Because if it's not true, then I'm fucked. So I don't want to think that, you know,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
you know, but then it goes the latter half is more the bits where you kind of just see the goals, and I'll paraphrase it. I like when he says, "Thus it has been for 1,000 years, and so it must endure until I've guided you to parity," which is a really nice,
Mm.
just elegant sentence. Then, Sidious, we must do our best to sabotage the dynamic Darth Bane set in motion, because we will need each other if we're to realize our ultimate goals. And he talks about how he wants, what does he say? Yeah, from us, I'm skipping a bit, but it says, "From us, the future of the Sith will fountain, and the diverse beings of the galaxy will be better for it." And I think he really does believe that bit, you know?
Mm.
So it's like it's you can discount all the obvious missteps he's making. There's some fluffy language that I've cut around the corners. There's bits you could disagree with, but at the very least, you get his honest perspective in the middle of all this as well. So it's a
Yeah.
really nice mingling of
And
all of
and
these
not only that,
ideas.
but it's the honest perspective and belief in the Sith philosophy. It's that strength through
Yeah.
adversity, might makes right core that underpins all of the kind of Sith approach to things. He believes that will make for a stronger, better galaxy, and you have to have that belief kind of not necessarily proven, but at least highlighted within the story. Otherwise, everything that the character believes and all the value they place in their own, shtick when it comes to the stuff of the Sith, it
Mm.
just doesn't matter. It's just flavoring on top of the personality they have beneath. And obviously that's true anyway, because sentience is sentience. But you need to have, if you want them to be, I'm really buying into this philosophy and this creed, then you need to see that, expressed at the kind of lowest level. In how it's going to manifest in
Yes.
their plans, and this is
I
that.
think
He
I think
says
another
if everyone acted
Yeah.
like a Sith, the universe will be a better place, which is hilariously moronic. But you need to buy it, as for the villain to work. So really, really well done.
he's envisioning a version of it where everybody knows their place on the pyramid, which
And is
is
happy with it,
not the
but
way it
while
works.
also
Yes.
not being happy with it.
Exactly.
It's so dumb.
Yeah.
Everyone must
And-
strive, but only within their specific, rule set that I, as the master and the perpetual master, put in place. And also,
Mhm.
they have to be happy with that while always striving against it, and it never causing any kind of chaos ever. That do that.
Right. This can't possibly backfire at all. But I do also think it's especially poignant when you consider that we've seen firsthand what Plagueis ended up, doing with his master, Tenebris, in terms of like the rule of two edict. Because in that specific moment, he was very much following the general course of how this thing has gone.
Mhm.
But the fact that he views that moment in particular as the ultimate crescendo of him transcending the philosophy, it adds more weight to the believability of his perspective, what he's saying to Sidious. It's like, yes, this is how it's been. I know that because that's what I did to my master. However, I have chosen by my own volition to rise above it, and therefore I'm going to instill that in you. The fact that we had that context leading into this, again, kind of it doesn't so much justify his viewpoint in the broader, scope of the universe, of course, but you do see from his perspective why he would think that way, why
Oh,
it
it's a
makes
really good
sense
point.
in this
Yeah.
moment. Like you ultimately buy it when you go from
Yes.
that Plagueis to Plagueis, right now.
Yeah. It's a really good point. I would recommend, because we've been going through this so slowly, if anybody's reading this along with us doing this, go back and listen to or reread the second chapter, chapter 2, not including the prologue, the second chapter. In that one, he thinks to himself. I mean, you have to remember he's been around for like over a century. I can't remember exactly how old he is at the start of the book, but he doesn't really say. I don't think. I think Palpatine asks him, and he just says, in human years or something, I'd be well over 100 or something." Um, I think he should say galactic standard years though, because that doesn't really matter. Like like we're
Right.
like
Everyone kind of uses roughly the same timetable in this
yeah,
universe. So
yeah,
it's
human years is kind of a funny way to put it, but he does say how for the first time in his life he feels the dark side, like not as a, what did he says something like, not as like a supporting wind like fluffing the sails of a pleasure boat, but as like this like violent storm. So he spent like a roughly a century with a muted connection to the dark side, and is like overwhelmed by, oh, this is what it is to be a soul Sith and the Dark Lord, to be an equal in the partnership. So he's high on that, you know what I mean? Like that rush of like
Mhm.
this is what it is to really be equal to the Force, like, is what he thinks. So he's wrong on that, clearly. But it's, as you said, his perspective, his delusion. You can get there. You can see the work he did to get to
Mm.
that conclusion. So that's really nice.
Mhm.
Um,
And again, if you also wanna tie it to just the Mune culture too, and, like, the more business philosophy, like, imagine you're, like, working your way up the system in a company, and then, like, for whatever reason, you after so long, you finally become, like, the CEO. Like, there's gonna be a rush there that, like, any business person probably would feel in some sense or another. So, that can also be seen as, like, tying back to his just native sensibilities. Even though it doesn't the text doesn't actually equate it to that, but again, like, I like that there's a few different angles you can look at it and come to roughly the same conclusion on why he feels this way at this moment. And it's also a good way too, because like, Plagueis's general evolution from where he is now to, later in the book when he's kind of gotten more like I guess you could say is like his more mystical cosmic sort of phase, and just
mhm.
how that's teed up here is really nice, because although Palpatine comes more center stage later in the book, there is still a very, very big difference between Plagueis, in chapter 2 versus chapter 13 versus, the very end. So again, seeing that evolution, that through line is there, even if the wave is a little up and down at times throughout.
Yeah, yeah. I also like the scene where he's tricking Palpatine with a force illusion, like a projection of his image that Palpatine's off. And I like that. It's just a cool scene, and I'd like to see it on screen. But B, I just like the idea that he has assembled a team led by people like Lars Hill to take care of business while he's screwing around in the snow with
Yes.
Palpatine in Force
Yeah,
Ghost.
it's a really funny
Like,
thought to know that how long he
yeah,
spends here while everyone else is
yeah,
running the galaxy. Presumably, there were times when he left Palpatine on his own to kind of meditate on the Force, or whatever, and
sure,
took care of
absolutely,
business.
yeah,
But it never alludes to that. So it's like I've got a decade to kill doing this.
Yeah.
yeah,
But even the way it's framed, like if this was a TV show, like you were saying, Matt, you could just imagine like Sidious's hands about to go on his neck, and then like they hit nothing, and like
Hmm.
Plagueis just
yeah,
Lol.
dissolves into like smoke, and then
yeah. He like
you hear his voice from a distance. He turns around, he's like over there.
yeah, yeah.
That's all great.
He like face plants in the snow after being all cut up and bruised from like hiking up this mountain, clawing his way like who knows how many times. So he's like a mess at the end of it. And I really like how like the Plagueis goes on kind of like a like you ain't shit kind of rant a little bit. And then he says, like, well, do I have like strengths? And he says, you have the force. I think that's part of like an earlier one, but then it kind of builds on the same thing with this scene where he talks about how he says, so easily tricked. You waste my time. More of this, and the dark side will never take an interest in you. And then he tries it again. He fails, and then he makes the point of like, if you're to succeed in inhabiting both realms, Sidious, the profane world, and that of the Force, you need to learn how to use guile to your advantage and to recognize when others are employing it. And then we talk about seeing things on screen. It says, without extending a
Hmm.
hand, Plagueis tugged him to his feet.
I
There's
love that
not
line.
there's no
Yeah.
elegant language in there. It's really simple, but it's a really elegant, like you can see like the wind fluttering around
Yeah,
the robes and the hair
the
and
the
everything
the
and the snow
tug, like the
falling.
hook, just pulling
And
him up.
Yeah,
looking
Yeah,
down
it's brilliant.
at Sidious,
yeah,
like
yeah,
complete disinterest on his
yeah.
face, not even moving a muscle as he's being ripped up. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and if you can survive a few more days without sustenance or rest, I may be inclined to teach you. And that almost could have been the end of the chapter, and I feel like he
Mm.
might have wanted it to be. But then we have the bit at the end, which is just a bit of lightsaber play, and that's when it's very short. It's like it almost feels tacked on. I don't know if the scene needed
Mm.
that, to be honest.
I
Like,
agree. I
but
felt it was a bit odd, personally,
Yeah, the visual is
yeah,
interesting, but
particularly with what comes afterwards as
it's a
well, with the
weird
physical
cut.
contest after that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, this is the bit. This is the bit where he says the have I no strength, and he says you have the force, apprentice, and the talent to lead. Like more, you have the bloodlust of a serial killer. But we need to hold that in reserve unless violence serves some extraordinary purpose. We are not butchers, Sidious, like some past Sith lords. We are architects of the future. And then he kind of ignores that and says, "How long, though?" Because he's asked that a few times, like because he's tired of suffering.
Again,
Yeah,
that hunger
yeah,
and the
And then makes a
desire.
lie of it as well. It's like not only how you ask how long for because you don't want this to stop. That's weakness. And it's like
hmm
no. How long
Right.
till I gain from this? And it's like oh yeah,
yeah,
you meant the
Well,
first. You meant the
even
former.
even said even said like much earlier in this sequence, it's like when Sidious says that he understands, Plagueis is all like, I said the same thing to my master when in reality I understood nothing.
Mm.
Mhm,
And he's like,
mhm.
so yeah, please go on appeasing me, but this isn't
I
gonna
love
work.
that, yeah, yeah, I love
Adding
that,
validity to the
and
mockery
it's
as well. It's like I'm mocking you, but
yes,
Yeah,
also I've been where you are. I know what I'm talking
I've
about.
been
Okay,
where you
I
are.
know.
I'm mocking you with purpose, with experience, with
Yeah.
with reason. It's brilliant.
You can literally, like, imagine just, like, a flashback of, like, Tenebris standing where Plagueis is and Plagueis standing where, Sidious is, like,
Mm.
however many decades in the past in, like, a similar location. It does make
Mhm.
you wonder too, because like, since Plagueis was already acclimatized to places like this, I wonder, like, where Tenebris
Where
took
did he
him to,
take
like,
him?
have
Yeah,
Mm.
I'd
yeah,
be I'd be very curious to
maybe
know.
Mustafar or something, I don't know, maybe that's how he knows about it, I just
Anywhere,
Mm.
like like
yeah.
somewhere like that, somewhere with acid rain, somewhere where you can't breathe, anything. Like, who knows? Like, and also because Tenebris was a Bith, so he can go some pretty weird places.
Mm.
Because mutants seem more close to human than they are to Bith. But yeah, but it's just that's where you get the line of like how long, and Plagueis like reignites the lightsabers is not a standard day sooner than a decade, which is like a uh, direct callback to the way Syndralic describes Mnemon mastery in the Essential Guide to the Force. So he quote mined that one and implied
He does that
his
so much. I
yes,
mean, we say
So
about every
random,
chapter
but,
of this
like,
book, but
it
my
works, but
God,
it's
this
it's
man.
very
yeah,
random.
And on top of that, it's one thing for kind of us to know a lot of it. We grew up with it. We've kind of assimilated it gradually over the course of years as a kid to adult, mentality. But Lucino was much older than that when he wrote this. I mean, he was a middle-aged man, somehow managing to muster up the energy to care about all these tiny little scraps of details and stories that he wouldn't necessarily have had a personal connection to himself. Just for the pure sake of and respect for the lore and the franchise, and kind of
yeah,
cohering this story together and making this magnum opus collection that he did at the tail end of
Yeah.
Legends. So yeah,
Never underestimate a fan's dedication.
exactly. Perpetually just tipping my hat to this guy. Lucino is a master of his craft. There's no doubt about that.
Mhm.
for sure. So that concludes chapter 12. So next we move on to part 2 of the book overall, which is called Apprentice to Power. It takes place between the years of 54 and 52 years before the Battle of Yavin. The chapter 13 is called Riders on the Storm, which is a cool like little nod, and a fun choice for this particular chapter. But yeah, so this one, in mad pursuit of their prey and all but taking flight, the two Sith, master and apprentice for 11 years now, bounded across the grassy terrain, their short capes snapping behind them, vibroblades clenched in their hands, and bare forearms flecked with gore, blood caked in the human's long hair and dried on the mutant's hairless brow. Twisting and swirling around them was a herd of agile, long-necked quadrupeds, with brown and black striped fur, identical and moving as if possessed of a single mind, leaping at the same instant, reversing direction, cycloning gregariously over the short-napped savanna. That wasn't all one sentence, but it was close. I think it's two. But it works very, very well.
Fantastic
I
visual setup. You can,
very much,
first thing in this
yeah,
book, you can immediately envision this in your
I
head if it was
envision,
a TV show,
yeah,
just
like
them opening up, bounding through the
You,
the.
thicket.
you know the original
Fantastic.
Clone Wars series, the miniseries.
I was just gonna say
It
this is
felt
Tartakovsky stuff.
yeah, it
Yes,
felt
exactly.
very like
100%,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah,
that's along
yeah.
that style, that
Yeah, Samurai Jack.
aesthetic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I tend to. He does describe colors, but I tend to view them muted and kind of like a silhouette, almost like in this. It's like exactly. I was thinking the micro series for sure.
Mm.
I love that. I love Plagueis's line here when he says, "This is not a chase. This is a summoning. You need to get behind the eyes of your target and become the object of its desire. The same holds true when you summon the Force. You must look. You must make yourself desirable, fascinating, addictive, and whatever power you need will be at your command." And so it's sort of like
But don't
that
forget, all the power
self.
also has to come from inside you and not from it.
No, is it this one? I think works. It's a
No,
loop,
again,
right?
I
It's
like
like a
it. It
loop.
works for
Yeah,
me all the time. But I love that kind of
yeah,
fascinating contradiction. Now this chapter is
yeah,
playing to the other side of it. Now we've talked. I've
Mhm.
talked about the intern. I've talked about the mustering. Now you have to
yeah,
talk about the summoning and the calling and the
yeah,
beguiling. And that luring.
Yeah,
It's kind of putting those
but
two together and finding the fuse
yeah.
beneath. For the Jedi, that's oneness with the Force. For the Sith, that's unlimited power.
It's a self-feeding
It's
cycle. Yeah,
yeah,
but
it's
but I
really
yeah,
mean,
really
but
cool.
yeah,
yeah,
but also, like, getting the idea of getting behind the eyes of your prey, also feeds into his lessons earlier about, seeing everyone around you as, like, potential tools to, like, further yourself. It's a little on the nose, but it's very much, I like how it describes, like, these animals are no different than the the people you manipulate in order to get what you want.
Mm.
There's no,
Yeah.
as far as we're concerned, there's no difference here between what we're doing now and what we're planning on doing with the entire galaxy later on. Again, it's saying a lot with a little, and the visual shorthand and the descriptors really help emphasize that.
Yeah, there's a lot here. This one I think is it's not necessarily my favorite of these scenes, but I really admire the work that was put into like what this scene is about and what it's saying, because what you're saying is certainly true and like the main point of it as well. But I think he's implying something a little bit more subtle as well, which I really like. He says, take a little while to set it up though. He says, blended into the herd, the animal Sidious had fixed his sight on would have been indistinguishable to normal beings. But Sidious had the animal in his mind and was now looking through its eyes, one with it. Alongside him, suddenly, the creature seemed to intuit its end and tipped its head to one side to expose its muscular neck. The moment the vibroblade stuck, the creature's eyes rolled back and grew opaque. Hot blood spurted, but quickly ceased to flow. The force departing, Insidious drawing its power deep into himself. I butchered that, tongue tied. But it's the bit of that that's really interesting to me is that alongside him, suddenly, the creature seemed to intuit its end and tipped its head to one side to expose its muscular neck. So it's like, you can kill me now, sort of
Mm.
like, and after this, like Plagueis says, now another one after that. And it says Sidious felt himself shoved into motion as if by a gale force wind. So it's like the force is directing this, and it feels to me like if you want to make sense of why the Jedi lose, I don't think that the work was done to make it set up entirely, but the way that Plagueis talks about cooperation with the Force and about gaining a controlling interest almost in it, stewardship over it, and how the Jedi have lost the allegiance of the Force, which is a great way that
Mm.
he phrases it later in the book.
Mhm.
It's sort of like saying, I don't like the fatalistic sort of like there's nothing the Jedi could have done. I don't go for that, but I don't go for the fact that people's choices like Anakin's don't matter. I hate when fans say that Anakin got screwed. Like, I mean, he did, but also that doesn't give you an excuse to turn into Darth Vader. If you
Right.
think that way, then you are the problem with our
Mm.
world. So
Yeah.
it's a I don't want to go too far with it in saying that there's nothing the Jedi could have done, but certainly I can understand how the Sith have gained a controlling interest to the point where at that particular moment in time with these particular Sith having done the groundwork that they did, the idea that the order is akin to this animal kind of getting itself ready for a death blow because the Force has left them at such a disadvantage. That I think is really, really cool. And just something that, again, it's just my take on it, but it's always what I've taken from it. It just feels like on reread anyway. When I saw where the
Mm.
actual story was going, the way that he talks about everything
The
else.
galaxy's ripe for
Um,
the kill. He set all it up
yeah,
in higher
Right.
terms earlier with the culmination of the grand plan, and like we're only a few short decades away from this victory kind
hmm
of thing. This is kind
Mhm.
of that come on then, ripe for the taking. Go for it. Can you
Right.
do it? And
yeah,
can you do it
And
again? And can
yeah.
you do it again? And can you keep doing it? And prove yourself worthy of the power that's kind of been bestowed upon you. I agree. It's a really cool moment.
Yeah.
Um.
And just to speak to what you were saying, Matt, it's also a good, like, when viewed like in the broader context of like the timeline, it's like why Yoda and Obi-Wan had to adopt like new ways of like thinking and interpreting, the Jedi way during their exile to pass on to Luke, in the sense of like,
Mm.
don't make the mistakes we made, and the way Luke interprets it, and it constructs his Jedi Order differently in terms of like how they view the Force and how they act upon it separately from this era. It's a nice way of like teeing up that distinction in and of itself, because it's not just, yes, these are Jedi, yes, these are Sith, but the eras and the way they interpret the Force are very different, and that's why they each do the things that they do.
What do you think?
hmm
Just diving straight into the story and living in the world for a minute. What would you say was the chief mistake of the Jedi of this era? What was the lesson that was learned by Luke? Because I have my own idea, but I'm curious about yours.
I don't think it's a singular lesson. I think it's an abundance,
No, for sure, but just like a
personally.
holistic
Um,
kind of like vibe. What was the key kind of okay? We've learned from the lessons of
well,
the past. We're going to take this
yeah.
mindset and carry it through to the future.
Well, definitely there's that somewhat less fatalistic approach to the Jedi's role in the wider galaxy, their involvement with, politics. Luke's order is, a bit not completely detached, obviously, but there's a general separation there. also things, then you have more basic things like their interpretation of relationships, family ties, doing good for the sake of good. That
Mm.
more I've often argued that like what Luke essentially did is he evolved the Jedi further, in his order, but he also brought a lot back that the Jedi had initially lost in this era. That more, spiritual, side of things, the more connections to, the day-to-day lives of people rather than the, bureaucracy that this
Mm.
era really got tied down in. And then on top of just that more spiritual nature, serving the force above all else aside from that. I think that's what, at least to me, like that's what he always really did. And you see a lot of that also in like the Yuuzhan Vong War, Jason and his journey and all that,
Yeah.
the truth is always, greater than the words we used to describe it. One of my favorite quotes from any Star Wars novel, which, when we get to Traitor in a billion years, I'm sure I'll have a lot to say about that. But to me, that's how I've always, interpreted it, having his own way of thinking from the mistakes, but at the same time bringing back what worked from the past that this era forgot. Sorry, I
Yeah.
didn't mean to ramble
No,
there,
no,
man. I
no.
didn't
That's
mean.
that's
Sorry about
that's exactly what I think. Because I think the reason I bring it up is because this book does a good job of establishing what exactly that is that's missing. Like it never outright explicitly states this is the problem of the current Jedi, but it sets up, through contrast with what we know from the New Jedi Order material that's come previous to this book chronologically in release order. It's it's kind of highlighting that sterility of the current order, that lack of organic kind of individual spirituality that comes later on. Like that to me, the reason that works in the context of this book is because that's what the Sith are always about. For all their flaws, it's very much about their own personal, intuitive relationship with the Force, particularly the dark side. They form their own personal perspective on it and shape their kind of the taught philosophy that they inherit from their masters into their own version of it. It's individual. It's kind of it is that relationship. Whereas with the Jedi, it's I'm supposed to think this and this and this, and it manifests this way and that way, and this is how it is, and that's true, and that's right in their sense. It makes sense because even on a pragmatic level, because they've got to scale this up so it is teachable to literally thousands of people. It is something that has to be functional at scale. And that individuality is a risk factor that you get to see flourish in the New Jedi Order series, because obviously Luke's order goes wrong quite a lot. If you give a lot of people individuality and personal interpretation of how the world's supposed to work and how their power is connected to it, you're going to get a lot more chaotic kind of energy there. But yeah, I just like that fits so naturally into the kind of the shift in tones between the eras, and the fact that Plagueis himself is kind of highlighting that here without ever explicitly stating it. I think it's really cool that so many different authors, but particularly the likes of the Xeno, have managed to kind of harness that and make it a part of the mythos and the world. It's a tricky thing to do.
Yeah. Well, like just building on that, like too, like it also kind of ties into something like a revelation that Yoda has, like during Revenge of the Sith, when he even like states like, "Oh wait, like the Jedi, like we've been preparing to fight the last war. We were preparing to fight the Sith from like the time of the Brotherhood of Darkness, not realizing how much that the rule of two had made the Sith evolved, which in a lot of ways also really kind of bigs up Bane's edict and why he saw firsthand what was wrong and what needed to change in order for them to eventually achieve victory. So again, the way that it all kind of comes full circle in that is it's a bit more on the nose in that sequence, but you could sort of look at this too and see the beginnings of that as well.
Even with their relationship with the
Well, I
Republic as
mean,
well, they're very much more knights than they are Jedi, which is the problem. And particularly that preparing yourself for the last war. That's true to life.
I was just
all
gonna
hell.
say,
That's culture. That's society. That's the world we live in right now. We're still fighting
right
the wars of
now,
the past. Right
yeah,
now,
the
we need to learn to
you know
fight the new war.
some people might not like it if we get political, but I don't care. Like we live in a pretty important time, and people need to understand exactly what they're being confronted with. And this is nominally what George Lucas said the prequels are supposed to be about. I
Mm.
don't think he really um, achieved that in quite the way that he maybe imagines himself or set out to. But I don't know. I don't know how successful he thinks he is, but I don't think particularly. But I can admire the attempt, and I understand like the stated goal where he was talking about like what it looks like to lose democracy and to hand it up to somebody who's actually a tyrant. And what the Jedi are doing, I don't know that you could say that they're doing everything wrong, but it's like they are. Where the Sith have a point is that the world is messy and chaotic, and that seems to be the natural course of things. The question that you have to ask yourself is whether you think that the work that people like Jedi do is worthwhile. And if you really don't think so, then I don't know if that there's any conversation to be having with such people. But I mean, that's ultimately like the question that's the only one that's pertinent. Yeah, it's this work never ends, it never dies. You can never prevent the Order from splintering or the Sith from returning in the same way that you don't just have, for example, in America, just a stable America all the time. Eventually, we're going to have to fight to get back to something sane. And what you have the Jedi doing is they're playing the games of like the current, for example, the democratic leadership of obeying the norms of the procedures and everything that they have been trained to you know to obey. It's the means by which they've always governed. Yeah, I'm using that term pretty loosely, but it's they obey the rules. The enemy doesn't, and at some point you have to contend with that. And right now, just as these Sith are doing, bad forces are in charge of all like the courts, um, the chains of procedure. They can flout decrees that don't work for them and make new ones like at the drop of a hat. It's the start of a regime. This is what it looks like, and you have a bunch of people clapping for it. So it is very much
Thunderous applause.
what this is about, and it isn't a fight that you ever end. It's a cycle, like it's a cycle, and at some point we were born and raised in a time of like from in our nations anyway, like stability and peace and relative peace, I should say. And there wasn't like a sense that the world could be faced with a scenario like this, but here we are. And so it's sort of like saying, who's responsible for this? Is it every Republican? No. Is it every Democrat for like just being asleep at the wheels? Like, no. Is it as simple as those two sides at all? No, not at all. So it's like it doesn't make a lot of sense to just blame the Jedi for everything in the same way. But at the same time, you understand that what they're doing is people often talk about the feeling of sleepwalking towards the edge. It does feel like that's what's happening. And with the Jedi Order, they can tell everything's going horribly wrong, or at least has the potential to, but there's only so many of them. There's only so much they can do. But you
Right.
do see scenes, not only in this book, like we'll see when the next time we do this, where Plagueis has a meeting with Sidious and Dooku and Qui-Gon, among others. Jocasta is also there, but she doesn't say anything. I don't think. And but you see scenes like this, and also in books like the Revenge of the Sith book, where the Jedi argue with each other and don't agree on what the next move should be. And my favorite expression of it is in the chapter Masters from Revenge of the Sith, where Mace and Yoda and Obi-Wan are together. I can't remember if they're in a ship or if they're in a meditation room or
I
wherever
think
they
they're
are.
in like
But
Yoda's. I think they're in like Yoda's room or something.
Yoda's room, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just the three of them, and Mace and Yoda. They don't shout at each other, but they're almost at that point.
They get
Like,
like testy. Yeah.
yeah, and Mace's point is, let's make a move. Like, let's do something. And Yoda's like, that could lead to more harm than good. We don't know what would happen. We can't risk the fallout. And the result is we don't do anything right now. And the Sith just keep moving along as they are. And that is what's happening. Like in the real world, for example, like that's what it feels is like what's happening. And so it is always, you don't ever want to write off Plagueis when he talks about how the world works, because he's right about a lot of it. The question is, what can we
He
do about it?
explicitly
And the answer to
highlights
that,
in slightly
yeah,
horrifying form, and I think I remember it's the end of this chapter or the following one, but it's like, oh, that's just an outright description of our modern times.
yeah,
like you said,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's a time that we haven't acclimatized ourselves to yet, because our generation, and again, at least in the West, has been living through
Yeah.
unprecedented prosperity in the human history, and we're forgetting that history has not finished. History has not ended.
Mhm.
100 years, 200 years from now, we'll
It
be
never
looking back on
does.
this time,
It's
and we'll
it's a
be,
meme. People say they're tired of living through history, because it's
yeah,
been one thing
interesting
after
time this
another,
has been the last 10
Yeah.
years at the very least. But yeah,
But at the same time, it's like every day is history. Like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
It's a big world. It's a big universe. Lot of
mm.
things happen every day.
And I think that looking at the philosophies of the Sith and the selfishness of it, just choosing to be someone who flourishes and exploits the weakness of the modern ages and actively tries to make the world worse to better your own prosperity and your own goals is just, it's not the way to be. Look
Right.
deeper. Try
You-
and not necessarily towards the Jedi level of selflessness, but try and lean that direction if you want to try and achieve something
And in
within
that
your life.
direction, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot you can take from it. I mean, Plagueis is. We described it before as like Plagueis, like a totem pole, and yes, like Plagueis, he sees the darkness all around him. He recognizes it, but at the same time, he's not doing anything about it. It's just like, well, yeah, this is how the universe is. But if you can place yourself at the top of the
Hmm.
Yeah.
totem pole, it's awesome. Or at least
Yeah.
that's how he thinks it is.
Yeah.
So
And then
at the same
don't
time, yes,
take
he's
the lesson of
recognizing.
I'm going to climb the totem pole. Don't make that be the lesson.
Yeah.
That's
No,
not
no,
good
no,
for you.
no.
It's not good for the
It
world.
is, and whatever you could say about the Jedi are flawed, and the Jedi made mistakes, and the Jedi helped bring this on. But I don't think you can say they're compliant with it. They didn't. They weren't knowingly compliant. You know, they found themselves off-footed and sort of powerless, and they were beaten. You know, at this
Yeah, they
game,
were
they lost, but
long
they
before. I
weren't.
mean,
Yeah, they weren't
yeah,
evil. You know, they weren't an
like
equal part of the problem. You know,
And if you're
it's
yeah,
looking
like
at
there was
Darth
there,
Vader
there,
and
the
Darth
walls were
Sidious and
closed.
thinking, yeah, they're fine, but then you look at Yoda and Mace
yeah,
and think evil. I mean, I'm questioning your sanity. I really am.
yeah, yeah,
It's just,
for sure.
The walls were closing in around them on all sides. I mean, let's be honest here. Like if Mace had succeeded in killing Sidious in Revenge of the Sith, do you think the Jedi would have been able to walk away from that without any issues? No,
Yeah,
not,
they'd
not
be in big trouble, but you wouldn't have had a fucking empire. Like,
yeah.
true.
like not certainly not one controlled by the Dark Lord of the
Right.
Sith anyway. You know,
But like there would have
yeah,
been a lot of chaos involved with that as well. And
absolutely,
like and
yeah.
the Jedi that would have been the end of the Jedi as an organization for sure.
For
Mm,
a time, but these things always come back. Is the thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's Star Wars can get away with this in this way because of like its take on duality isn't quite so surface level as it might seem. You know, so it
mm,
makes sense for the timeline to be sort of a repeating cycle of the same conflict going on and over and over and over again because it can come in different shapes and forms and everything. That's our world.
yeah.
Again, we've been here before in some ways, but not in our lifetime. And this is still not the worst time by any stretch of the imagination. It's just bad. Things are bad, but they're not like as terrible as they could still be. So that's why we need to, do the work of. That's why we need to decide: is this work worthwhile doing? That as I was trying to say earlier. You don't just
Mm,
give up because it's a chaotic ass world and everything's finite anyway. So okay,
Right.
you can embrace nihilism if you want, but it's best if you do so in the forest and leave everyone else to society and civilization.
mm.
I get that doesn't work that way all the time, but please, that's your cue to leave if you think that way.
Right.
But
Well,
yeah, anyway,
speaking of like adventures in
drawing
the
it back
forest,
to
yeah,
yeah.
getting back into the hunting, session. I think we should acknowledge too that this chapter takes place on a world called Buoyant, which has been,
I meant to ask,
yeah,
sorry,
very
before we go any further, is that a creation from this book, or is that another like weird ass thing that he's dug up from something and gone,
no
let's use
clue.
this again? Because
Why
this is
don't you
like a
guys talk
weird
and
choice.
I don't know off the top of my head, but
Basically,
I'll
the
see
whole
what I
thing with
can find out.
like the world's gravitational stability has been thrown completely out of whack, which has caused a lot of climate issues and made the planet very remote, and that's why it's like a perfect place for Sith to train out in the open, because aside from them, it's just them, animals, and a society of primitives that have actually come to worship the Sith because they've been coming here for so long. I do like the fact that, again, it's an interesting bit of like prose where it's like, I believe the quote is something along the lines of, Plagueis has had many visits to this planet, um, more often as master than apprentice. I believe is something along the line. Not Plagueis himself, but like masters in general have like used this
Yes.
as like
Oh,
one of the
Yeah.
biggest training grounds. Sorry, I misspoke there slightly. But again, little descriptors like that. I like how it shows that like this is more of a thing that is used as a teaching versus just general trials.
Mm.
It adds a little layer to that history for this place, which is really nice. And it would make sense that the rule of two, trying to keep, out of the public eye as much as possible. If they find a world that like generally works for them in their specific style of training, that it would make sense for them to come back here as often as possible.
It's very. You mentioned before, just before between recording beats, that you sort of thought the chapter was very Shakespearean, and it's kind of very much harping into that
Yes.
kind of theatre and dramatic kind of tone. And I completely
Yeah.
agree. And it
Well,
makes this kind of,
yeah.
not plausible because it's plausible anyway, but it makes it more enjoyable if you look at it through that scope. The
Mhm.
kind of that elevation of just theatricality, I guess, to the whole chapter. But it always amused me the kind of almost it gets away with that despite the kind of silliness of the whole situation. It's sitting in that Star Wars space where you can take something that is broadly speaking a bit over the top very seriously because of the nature of the Sith and the philosophy that they've just spent so many chapters building up and kind of crystallizing in your mind. All while faced with the fact that this is them, going to a planet. If any anthropologist comes along and studies a society, they're going to be like, huh, what? But that kind of undermines a little bit about the rule of two, being secret all about the secrecy and hiding from the Jedi, etc. But you don't care about any of that because it's steeping itself in the kind of that cultural this is what the Sith could bring to the galaxy kind of argument that has been made in the previous chapter. This is Plagueis' kind of point being proven to himself, at least, and arguably to Sidious as well.
Mhm.
Not that Sidious on a personal level cares about any of that long term. But
Right.
it's the physical justification for everything that we've just had in the previous chapter, which I think is really, really effective
Yeah.
and just
Well,
fun
like,
the way it's
speaking to that
portrayed.
Yeah. Well, speaking like to that Shakespearean angle, like the reason that really hits me in this chapter really comes down to like just the nature of how Plagueis speaks to Palpatine here. Like for example, I'll just like cue up a little thing. Like he says, the original idea was to capture the power of the Force and make it subservient to the will of sentient life. The ancients, the Celestials, the Rakata, didn't pronounce judgment on their works. They moved planets, organized star systems, conjured dark side devices like the Starforge as they saw fit. If millions died in the process, so be it. The lives of most beings are of small consequence. Now, the reason that very much reads that and other sequences in this chapter like read as very Shakespearean to me. It's like because like to me like Shakespeare like on there's a lot of different ways to interpret it, but like to me it's kind of like debate. Like you're debating not just with other individuals, but almost like with yourself in terms of
Yourself.
Mm.
how it's like written. It's like
The
to
human
be or not to
struggle.
be. That is the question. Tis noble for a mind to go slings and arrows. Or face the calling. Of a ravenous. Ocean ideas, yes, no, that sort of that way of speaking, like it's almost like when he's talking to Palpatine saying those like in that dialogue, it's like a debate because it's like, well, they did this, therefore this, the Rakata did this, people died, but so be it. That's how it is. It very much reads like that. Not so much like a lecture, but like he's really drilling into the point of these histories to Sidious. And also, it's an interesting way of touching on just what is the Sith imperative? What is the, dark side? What is this way of thinking? Like, is it, detach yourself from the individual and just sort of look at it plainly as is. The way he's sort of describing these things really reads, that way to me. And it's very interesting because I feel like if this was written in any other way, it really would just come off like, oh, let me just go into this historical diatribe. The Rakata
Hmm.
did this, the Celestials did this. Isn't that interesting? No, like, no, that's not the point. The point isn't the history in and of itself. The point is, this is what this history teaches us from then to now, why it's important, what they did, what we are, still has relevance, but you need to make it your own. And that's the writing in that is really strong. And that's why honestly, this whole sequence, the is one of my favorite. Like you can
Hmm.
quote mine from Plagueis and come to a lot of very interesting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The bit after the one you already read, where he was like talking about like this is what the Jedi have failed to understand. The Jedi have failed to understand this is what he says. They are so busy saving lives and striving to keep the powers of the Force in balance that they have lost sight of the fact that sentient life is meant to evolve, not simply languish in contented stasis. That isn't only an idea that we've already been talking about. I mean, other ways, and what the problem, quote unquote, with the Jedi is, but it's more just like the use of the language, not simply languish and contented stasis, has so much more power than something dark side and so be it, or whatever. Like there's a place for that, but you do need this extra added bit of sort of it's not just the advanced like vocabulary. It's something there's something musical about
It
language. There's
touches
something
on like a deeper.
satisfying about the way that he's saying it. There's something enticing about the way that he's putting this case. Like even if you don't believe it, you can you you feel called you feel a calling to contend with the thought, even though you don't agree with it from the start. It's and then what you were saying earlier about the Rakata and the Celestials and those just name dropping, because he name drops all kinds of things in this chapter. Like
Mhm.
like he gets into all the ancient Sith lords. He gets into one sort of uh obscure sect of force wielders after another. Um, as you said, going into that history isn't the point of it, but having a diverse and rich setting like the Star Wars timeline used to be, it gives that sense of like this what I'm saying isn't just some random screed, and it isn't just something random like the planet Buoyant. I did look it up as we were talking about it. It was created just for this, at least
Ah,
according
okay,
to
okay.
the Wikipedia citations, which
Could
research
be
that,
wrong, but
but I mean,
they're usually
those tend to
fairly
be pretty
spot
good
on. Yeah.
because it's cited, but it's aside from just like random bits of fluff and filler, it gives that sense of like stepping stones of like this is how the philosophy changed and oriented itself throughout the generations, and this is the place in the timeline that we currently are standing.
Mhm.
We occupy this moment. We own this moment. We built on the shoulders of giants. Though he does give credit to like what came before, like even
Mm.
though he thinks they're far and away the best and the only thing really worth being in the end. He sort of understands that without the rest of the galaxy existing as it does, there's nothing to lord over. We don't want
Mm.
nihilism. We don't want nothing. We justify our place by embracing these tenets. Is more what it is,
Mm.
and he believes them to be true. Clearly, I really like speaking of this stuff. About how you said you could quote mine this endlessly. This is also the bit we talked about this years ago when we did it as a group of five. But I remember because Antoine wanted to have a conversation about this where he talks about the dual nature of the Force and the different ways that the Jedi and the Sith approach it. He says the power of water and the power of fire are entirely different. Glaciers and volcanoes both have the potential to transform landscapes, but one does so by burying what lies beneath, where the other spews forth new terrain. The Sith are not placid stars, but singularities. Rather than burn with muted purpose, we warp space and time to twist the galaxy to our own design. Um, Really beautiful use of the language. Again, you have to agree with certain fundamental core just elements of nature here, and like the push and pull nature of like competing ideas. And again, some of this is beyond philosophy; it's just nature.
Mm.
Right.
But it's the point he chooses to end on, the point he chooses to embrace, that you either agree with it or you don't. And I hope you
Mhm.
don't agree with it, but I can't control what you do.
Right.
You know.
Well, again, it goes back to like it feels very much like a debate about just the wider nature of the cosmos. Like take the Jedi and Sith out of it, and you could kind of look into this. It's like this is what nature is. This is what it can
Mhm.
do. It can go from one angle to another. Both are equally possible, but this is how this is where one path leads you of way of thinking. This is where another can lead you, and ultimately what you are and how you interpret is how you will build your own philosophy on it. Like
Mhm.
yes, he is like he is very much pushed, trying to push in a specific direction, but I like that he at the very least pretends that there's a choice in
Mm.
this matter, which I guess there is for Sidious in a lot of ways, because he does want Sidious to build his own way of thinking, so long as it still leads to a goal to where both of them can prosper. So again, that's sort of that hypocrisy, but at the same time, nothing he's saying, at least in certain principles, is wrong in and of themselves. It's just when you add all the evil Sith flavor to it that things go off the deep end, which
Yeah.
is interesting. It kind of goes back to it's almost like a really, really warped version of like what Yoda is saying to Luke on Dagobah when he's just describing the nature of the Force, in a different way. Like, life creates it, makes it grow, the tree, the rock, all of these are connected, the difference is only in your mind, sort of thing. And whether or not that's an intentional homage, is anybody's guess. With Lucino, you never know. But again, I like
Well,
it. It speaks to a deeper sort of nature of just life that you could read into it, even though it's being delivered by such an evil person and is very clearly trying to be set in an evil way. Again, certain fundamentals can be applicable in just about any philosophy, which is nice in and of
well, it
themselves.
it it
Mm.
kind of gets to the point of like, without saying outright, like thesis statement, Sidious, this is what I have to teach you today. But like, what is the point of this lecture? And it's very
Mhm.
focused. It's about explaining where the Jedi have got it wrong and justifying our own monstrosity. Like our own monstrous nature. I mean to say, uh, to make sure to explain the avenues we take in the pursuit of our goals and why we have decided that
Mhm.
that's the correct course of action. Because it starts
Justification
off
for
by,
their own
yeah,
tyranny.
the early implication of what he's saying is that an acknowledgement that the Jedi do have power almost equal to our own. You have to deal with that from the outset. Like, if you're going to if you're going to try to guide somebody down the dark path, why not go down the path of light, though? You do have to give a reason for this. And so he explains the competing nature of the power to transform landscapes. And then he talks about, again, just the acknowledgement that they hold power when he says the Sith are not placid stars. That implies that the Jedi are. You know, it says we're singularities, rather than burn with muted purpose for no reason, just to exist and just to maintain what's there, to languish in contented stasis, burn with muted purpose. A beautiful poetic way of saying it. You know, we warp space and time to twist the galaxy to our own design. So it starts off with that, an acknowledgement of what the Jedi have and where they've got it wrong. Then he summons lightning and explains a Jedi could even do this, but not truly, because they haven't really embraced these tenets. It's not quite the same thing, you know. So it's very much, it is pushing him down the dark. But I mean, he's a Sith master. That's what he's supposed to do. He's
Right.
not.
That's the point.
He might present it as being somewhat objective, and he does say that you're meant to discover the Force in your own way. Bane did that with Xana. He couldn't teach her sorcery,
Mm.
but it isn't. At the same time, you're not just saying, well, you know, read these books, and if you become a Jedi or neutral or whatever, that's cool. It's like, no, you're meant to be a Sith, and I'm here to show you why that's the correct road to take. You know, like, and it's very, very. I mean, he says that the Force cannot be treated deferentially. It has to be, you know, you have you, in order to summon and use lightning properly, you will someday have to be on the receiving end of its power as a means of taking the energy inside of yourself. And Sidious says, "Will I eventually become physically transformed?" And he says, "Into some aged, pale-skinned, raspy-voiced, yellow-eyed monster, you mean?" I was like, yes, of course, actually.
Yeah, that's how it is.
But, you
That's
know,
how it is.
yeah, but it's like
Yeah.
and then he lists a whole screed of, like, you know, ones who turned ugly over the course of their careers, from King Amen of Onderon to Nihilus and Darth Sion and everything. And then he says, "The power of the dark side is an illness no true Sith would wish to be cured of."
That
So
was one
it's
of the line I was going to reference
justifying.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, justifying it
Yeah.
all, and the fact that you should want this. You know, why would you not?
Yes.
And genuinely not understanding the answer to the question. It's just like, why
Right.
would you not?
He
You know, it's the
he
going back to
sees it as
the thing that kind of revived us back into the Star Wars universe again. You know, give me my rose, Dooku. I mean, like,
yeah.
what do you mean? Be serious.
Yeah,
I'm like, I am
yeah,
being serious,
Yeah.
you
yeah.
idiot. It's like we
It's an
Mhm.
value
amazing
different
contrast.
things. I
Yeah.
don't want to have power for power's sake, which is something that Plagueis highlights here. You know, power is not for its own sake; it's for a purpose. Even though actually, no, it's not. It's for its own sake, because that's the ultimate
Right.
foundation of the Sith's philosophy. No matter how much they choose to
But it goes back
deny
to
it.
what you were
Right.
saying earlier. He does have to believe these things because
Mm,
of how wealthy he is, how powerful he is. He doesn't have to get off his ass to do anything.
yeah,
So what motivates that narratively? It requires this belief
exactly.
that this is worth doing.
Exactly,
You know.
and he takes that and works
So
within
Yeah.
so well. So it's a beautiful flaw. You know, it's so
yeah,
artfully done.
Yeah. Realizing the corrupting, nature of what he's doing, but at the same time convincing himself that that's okay, in order to achieve, what he wants to achieve.
hmm
Again, goes back to like just the broader, issue with the dark side in general, and what he was speaking to, in the previous chapter about letting yourself be subsumed in order of, when the dark side takes an interest in you, again, taking that energy inside yourself. And it is interesting that they use, force lightning as a framing for all this because, obviously, Sidious, in terms of like release order, he's the first character we ever saw use force lightning in the
Mm.
franchise in Return of the Jedi, and he is pretty synonymous with the ability. I don't think anyone's gonna question that at this point. So it's nice to really see the origins, of that. And even though we don't really even though we never see his quote unquote first time, using it, I like how that's, teed up here, in this, specifically. And the fact that it
hmm
does all come full circle and why it becomes so synonymous with him, again in the wider legendarium is great to see.
Mm.
Would you guys have
That was
wanted to see his first ever use of lightning?
Oh, when you
Just
mentioned it
curious.
there, I was
well.
thinking in my head, like, that's something I would have probably thought to do, but also I don't feel like I particularly need to. It doesn't give you much of anything. It's one of those things where,
Yeah, I
yeah,
was
that's a
gonna
logical
say.
tick
Yeah,
box to have, but
Right.
also I don't know what it would do
yeah.
besides saying, well, cool, we've seen his first time. You know, it's
Yeah, because even Bane, you do see the first time he does it, and it's a
yeah, and
fun
he's just
scene, but
like,
it's ultimately a bit
woo!
shallow.
As
Yeah,
he's dancing around the library.
yeah,
Look what
yeah,
I can do, sort of thing. Yeah.
yeah.
Obviously,
So I
Sidious
Like
would
think
have
this
the
to have
way
a lot
that
more purpose to
this
it than that.
does
It would
come
have to be
back.
like him killing a
Yeah.
target. Like, it would be interesting, I think, if they'd made it the first time he'd probably harnessed it at the time when he kills his master. Like when he's like,
Mhm.
the kind of like, I've been harnessing this, I've been building it up, I've been roiling the storm inside, I've been keeping it secret, keeping it, hidden from you, doing everything that I've been taught by you, and I've been harnessing, and here it is. Like, here's the proof of my power. Here's my everything I've learned from you going back into you. Here's you taking the lightning. That he maybe
Yeah.
never he had to take himself, and yet still has his power. So he's proven his master wrong. There could have been a lot to play with there, I think.
Right.
But
Well,
I don't know.
it almost feels like that's kind of what Lucino wanted to do because it is later referenced, again much later, like during like the Maladian attack, where Sidious like muses to himself like whether or not his ability to summon lightning, whatever come. And it does kind of feel like that's what they were teeing up. But obviously, I think this is one of the instances where Lucino was kind of locked in with the pre-established lore, because there are instances of Sidious using lightning chronologically before he kills Plagueis. So I think he was kind of like locked into like I can't,
Yeah, particularly
without
Lucino.
retconning,
Yeah,
without blatantly retconning anything. I
a
don't
lot
think
of
there's
other
any way.
authors would have just hand waved it away, but he's like, "Oh no, I've got to abide by this because I've done all
Yeah.
of this work. I can't stop here."
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting because it very much I can very much feel Lucino's frustration in a lot of ways when that later comes up, and I agree with you, Callum. That would have been really thematic and really interesting. But again, like there's some things you just can't really write around unless you're okay with doing it, like you said. But he's not really the kind of person who would go in that direction, you know.
Well, in the time since we started doing this, he did an interview for some channel that I'm not familiar with. It was about like an hour-long talk, and they talk about just sort of his career with Star Wars in general, and kind of like some of the questions we've asked, like how he got into writing this book. Like one of the things I wondered was who had the idea to make Plagueis immune, and it does come directly from George, apparently. But he initially, he was canned. Not well, the book was canned. He wasn't fired from the project. They canceled it. And we've talked a little bit about why I thought that was when it came to the release of the Darth Bane books. They supplanted what should have been Plagueis with Rule of Two instead for reasons that are. Yeah, I'm just kind of reading between the lines and seeing, and I could be wrong about some of that. But he does make a mention of that. They keep it's like an hour-long talk where they talk about the early days of his career and sort of like the later works and which work is he most proud of or most happy with. And his favorite book is this one. He did say his favorite book of his was Plagueis, which I think really shows. But
Mhm.
he was asked several times by the people who were interviewing him whether he had anything else in the works uh, under this new canon ever since the sale to Disney. And not in so many words, but he's just like, no, I don't think so. And it's not like he's retired or too old or doesn't care. I think he doesn't want to work in uh, a setting that has nuked continuity the way that did, the one that he helped build. So it's very important to him to honor other authors, as you were getting at with that. So it might seem like a somewhat trivial thing in the hands of another author to just, well, this is the story I want to tell, so I'll pounce on it. But it was clearly very dear to him. Like he didn't quite say it outright, but you could tell that was like what was behind his like, nah, I think I'm done writing for Star Wars. So yeah, I'm sure if he wanted to, he could angle for it. They just have to look at the sales and
I
how
was
many
going to say
books
it
he
wouldn't
wrote.
take much convincing. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, this
Right, you would
guy,
think.
this guy might be someone worth having on the docket.
Yeah.
Like I keep telling them, continue
And he said that
Legends,
he
guys,
was,
continue Legends.
yeah, he was quite
Especially
polite about it, but it was pretty clear that's what he meant. Was just like, I don't have an interest in writing in this
Right.
continuity anymore.
Yeah. But
Which
like
I don't blame him at all. That's when I jumped ship.
right. I mean, it's like for me, it's like, would that have actively made the story better if that were the case? I mean, I think I can see arguments both ways. I mean, I still think, I mean, when we finally get to the actual like sequence of the death of Plagueis, we've mentioned like in the past that we have some
Yeah.
issues with that. I don't know if that being his first use of lightning necessarily would have solved all of the issues with that sequence, but it definitely would have added an extra layer to it. But
Yeah.
again, I think you can
I
look
think
at it either way, and nothing really, it doesn't break the universe either way,
we'll
I
get
would
to that
say.
scene when we get to it. It's not like it's a horrible scene. It's just there's something about it that feels like they dropped the ball at the end of it. It has the makings of a good scene, but it needed more connection to everything that came before it. And what you're talking about would be a nice thematic tie to it. One of several that you could have gone down, but we'll get to that in time, I suppose.
Right.
But that's sort of the end of this one. Then there's the business on Hypori. I don't really have much to read directly from this, but I do like. We'll just talk about like the point of it. Like he's sort of like using this planet, which is controlled by the Techno Union, which has always been one of the funniest evil names with the Techno
Yeah.
Union. But it's better than Commerce Guild, which is just boring as hell. But
Yeah,
like Techno
again,
Union is so
it
funny.
makes them. It's Star Wars. It works within Star Wars, but it's just funny when like, there's a Techno Union and
The Techno
the
Union,
Trade
yeah.
Federation and all. I mean,
I
there's a
mean,
lot that comes up with
intergalactic banking clan sounds perfectly fine, and you know what I mean. It's like
Yeah.
that I can take that seriously, but there's something
But you
about
shouldn't be
Techno
able to
Union.
though. Intergalactic banking clan. Like, that sounds ridiculous. But one, it flows because it's got a nice rhythm to it. But also, it's Star Wars,
I
so it
mean,
fits the
yeah.
what's come before. There's a cleverness to what they choose here.
And I mean, Borg was already taken, so
Yeah.
exactly. that sort of thing with the whole machine sort of society.
Mhm.
Is it the
But,
Archduke as well of Geonosia?
yeah, something like
Archduke,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's funny
I
there.
mean, they are a hive, so that kinda tracks, I
Mm.
guess.
Okay, so for those who don't know, this is Hypori. If you don't recognize the name or if you've never seen it, it's from the micro series. This is where General Grievous was first introduced, fighting the Jedi.
AKA one of the best intros of any villain in all of Star Wars.
Yeah, for
Very cool.
sure. Like, it's something that like I tend to think that like quote unquote casuals who were like just kids at the time would remember, even if they're not like hardcore Star Wars
Oh
fans.
yeah,
You
for
know,
sure.
because
It would have left an
everyone was
impression.
so
Yeah.
yeah, everyone was so disappointed when you saw the movie. Like, oh, that's not the character at all, man. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's I like the whole what am I trying to say? The reason given for like why they're here. It's a place that they kind of rent out without any like paper trail, like to just be able to wreak havoc without leaving obvious signs of like users have been here and have destroyed the place. So you can use it as a training ground. And just like these expensive ass favors and just again like what does this mean to like the people in charge of the techno union when like Ego Damask is like, hey, I want a
I need a squash
personal like
court so I can destroy a
flight,
bunch of droids.
yeah, exactly, yeah. I want to land an uncharted flight on your planet so I can do some stuff. It's like, oh, isn't this guy a banker? Yeah, but we can't afford
The
to
things you
endanger
can
this
do when you
business
can throw
relationship.
Target
that level of money at the problem.
Target practice,
Yeah,
I don't know. Well, I mean, I
Mm.
do like that they emphasize the fact that, like, when they do this sort of training, it's just deflecting bolts back into the
sure.
droid because they don't want
Yeah,
like, if they're like, if he
lightsaber blades. Yeah,
cleaves the droid in half with a lightsaber, that leaves a very noticeable, style of damage. So I
Mm.
like that little bit of, just a little bit of world building to kinda help justify the secrecy. I guess also out of universe too with that, like, maybe they're just assuming, like, they're doing, like, target practice with blasters or something, I don't know, but yeah.
well, he does talk about familiarizing yourself with all this weaponry, whether it's bombs or blasters, and you have
Mhm.
to like recognize each model and make that's on the black market, even just everything. I like the line that I wanted to read is really good. It says, "A being trained in the killing arts doesn't wait for you to acquire him as a target or establish him or herself as an opponent, as if in some martial arts contest. Your reactions must be instantaneous and nothing less than lethal, for you are a Sith Lord and will be marked for death." I like how
So
he
don't do the anime thing and don't wait for your opponent to power up, just go for
the
it.
Darth Maul, Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon thing, like, or just like all that stuff. I mean,
Oh, yeah, I get that
they
too.
do this all the time. They do this all the time, but it's also like himself is almost assassinated successfully in this book. So it's like he doesn't really walk his talk, but it's a good lesson to learn. I think it's in a description that really applies to the Old Republic trailers, more so than anything else we pretty much see. Because like whenever Malgus walks into a scene, somebody's gonna die. It's just or at least he's gonna try his best. They don't waste time with posturing or announcing themselves or going off on long anime screens. It's just
Mm.
I'm here to kill you. You're an enemy. You're in my way.
What do the kids call it these
And I
days?
like that
Aura
he says
farming.
because you're a Sith Lord. I beats me. Um, but, like when he says, I really that's a new one for me. I'm still stuck on like amaze balls from like 10 years ago.
Oh
Just like what the
god,
fuck.
that was
But
the
anyway,
one that came out and put it in the dictionary. It's like, do you not understand how slang
it doesn't
works,
really
guys?
fun
You
with.
don't need to legitimize it. It's
Yeah,
gone in a year. It's like, oh,
yeah. But anyway, but yeah, for you are a Sith Lord and will be marked for death. Is like I think it's just like also the Jedi. He doesn't say it that way, but it is like it's both. You're going to be brought into conflict with some force that wants to kill you just by the nature of your existence, pretty much.
mm.
And the forces you're tapped into, the people that it brings you into contact with. But yeah, I just really like that as like a mission statement of you've got to be ready for anything because like if you're a Jedi, Malgus could walk in like at any moment, kind of a thing.
I also yeah.
Yeah,
I also like too because the consistency with the writing, because oftentimes both before this sequence and after it, Plagueis's POVs very specifically like point out weapons or tools by make and model. So I like
mhm.
that this establishes that mentality and why it's written in that way because that's just
Yeah.
how he thinks. It's
It is
a
how Lucino writes, but it
yeah,
justifies why does he know this and like how does he know all this? Like, yeah, he's had a century of living this way, for sure, for sure. Does the hard work of like justifying what could be seen as overwritten stuff.
right.
Mm.
Well, it adds to the
Um,
immersion because you're immediately it puts you into the character's thought process, from the get-go, and you
Mhm.
could immediately adopt like, okay, when I'm reading Plagueis's POV, I'm probably going to encounter this style of writing, and you just kind of get used to it. And you're not even really thinking about it anymore, which is something good that really any author should strive for.
But,
Agreed.
then they get into I like this bit, again, the exceptionalism stuff. Um, Plagueis says, "Darth Bane advised one day the Republic will fall and the Jedi will be wiped out, but that will not happen until we are ready to seize that power for ourselves." When, Sidious said, that's a hard one. When, Sidious said, "How will we know when the time is right? We are close to knowing." It's like, how do you know this? Just like, is it because
How do
you're
you
in
know what
charge
you
now?
don't know? Yeah, exactly. Well, I
Yeah,
guess
He
yeah.
the
has he
suspicion
has
is that
he
he's
has
got the
Phantom Menace on DVD in his ship,
yeah.
so
Well,
he's all
also we're
good with
building
that.
up gradually to the kind of stuff with the rituals and everything, the large scale galactic force stuff that's going.
Sure.
So like, the
That all
hints of
means
that,
something.
and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
again, it's going back to that whole I don't believe in fate, but also I believe in fate thing that he does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
would Darth Bane approve of what they're doing? Who knows? But
Mm.
that is actually a question that a lot of fans have like asked over the years. Like, would Bane, if you took Bane and put him in like this era, would he approve of like Plagueis and Sidious as people? And I think I mean, it's an interesting idea, and it's like,
I
would he be
think
proud? Would he be proud, or would he be like,
It,
dude,
it
this
is
is
an
not what I
I
interesting
meant?
think
question
he
for sure.
I think
Yeah.
he would definitely like I think he would I think he would appreciate Plagueis, yeah.
Mm.
Palpatine
I like to think he'd see
it's
the selfishness even in him. Like he'd see, okay, you're like spoilt brat, play with your toys level of nut
Hmm.
job. You're not someone who's going to be guiding the grand plan that I've set in mind. You're not someone with purpose, someone with order.
Hmm.
You want the line to end with you. That's not how this works, kind of thing. I'd like to think that he'd at least see through that.
I mean, I think that's a reasonable point. I mean, what Bane's whole thing is like he cares about the welfare of the order overall above himself for the most part. You know, just
he does, yeah.
That's the
his
one thing that
quests
Yeah.
makes
for
him
life
tolerable
extension
to me.
notwithstanding, which we already talked about in our
Th- th-
review. But
Yeah,
That's
he
that's the
sticks with
core
it and actually
difference
believes
between the two.
his own line. He will die for his own cause if as long as he thinks
right,
it's
if he has
worthwhile.
to, he will.
Yeah.
The question is to me like whether he thinks there's anything to work with Palpatine because
Mm.
it's many things on the other hand, on the other hand, on the other hand, like a lot of sequences like that, and ultimately I think it's probably he would try to, but I think some of it is probably grounded in a lack of like just core. Their early lives are so different.
Mm.
Plagueis and Palpatine each are scions of wealth, um, and they come from like if not political dynasties, then certainly like families that wield influence and have a say. And Bane comes from like the ass end of the galaxy in
It
a hole in the ground.
it's hard to see
I,
how much
I
of the
don't
fact
know.
that the grand plan led to that he would let him forgive it. Like how much of it he would
Yeah,
see, oh, this is the culmination of everything I did 1,000 years down the line. I'm proud of this. Of course you're all as powerful as you are now. Of course you're as influential, etc. Because we've been building up to it. This is what
Mhm.
we need. We're this close to the plan. It's whether or not he identifies with that, or whether or not he lets the personal aspect of it go in. Like this feels like a tarnishing. This feels like a pollution, a corruption of what the vision was. You haven't had to strive like the original Sith did. How much of it.
yeah,
I think the crux of how much he sees the grand plan success in that is what kind of makes that work.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the power that they both hold is undeniable. The political machinations that Plagueis is able to take advantage of, or as you just said, born out of the fruits of the labors of countless other Sith lords. Well, he says there are 30, so you can count them.
Yeah.
But I mean to say, who knows how many rather. Um, he would certainly respect like the game that's going on, but I could easily see like an awkward meeting over like a glass of wine in a back room. Like, okay, so let's talk about you, kind of like job interview
Mm.
stuff. Like I mean,
Mhm.
it feels like I don't think he would particularly like either of them. And if you could do this somehow, it wouldn't make sense because like somehow you're taking him out of time. But
Mm.
Plagueis obviously just thinks this guy. I mean, like he thought he knew it all,
Right.
but whatever. Like I know better. So it's
Mm.
like and Plagueis's reasons for that aren't that well defined outside of just his own ego. I don't think. I've been through this book a number of
Mhm.
times, and certainly I have my critiques of the Bane books. I'm not coming in like Bane is perfect and utterly perfect, and how dare you? But he doesn't really ever get to like the fine details of precisely where he thought Bane got it wrong.
Mm.
I think it's more about like I think it's ultimately if you think that Bane is always if you think that Bane's biggest contribution is correct, like a true maxim, like that's unavoidable. If you really buy into the rule of two, it means that at some point you have to be okay with going away, and he's
Mm.
just not. That's core to his character. He wants to live forever. Palpatine's more or less the same way, and I would say most Sith are. But it's that is kind of the reason why I still respect Bane after a
Mm.
fashion, because he, as we just said, he does get out of the way. He does agree that he does want to be subverted. He actively wants that because it's order first and him second. But it's a selfish, it's
It's the point
contradictory, but
proven.
it's
It's like,
still,
this is how the
Right.
galaxy works. I know it is, and I'm going to prove it by
yeah,
abiding
He
to this,
generally
and setting
believes
this
in
up.
it.
yeah.
Yeah,
So it's
he
like
generally
I
believes
feel,
the doctrine he set forth.
Yeah, Sidious to
yeah,
me doesn't have
if
any connection to the philosophy. Like, he doesn't actually care about
sure,
anything to do with the Sith outside of I'm getting special power from it. To me,
yeah.
and that makes what makes his character work. That's not a critique, but it's just I don't think Bane would gel with that.
Before we ever had the word Sith, he was the Emperor. He's
Mm.
an Emperor, like really. Like he's kind of a cheeseball, corny villain, really.
Mm.
He's the ultimate, personification of evil. But you didn't need an understanding of anything Sith to understand what this character was. For a character like Bane, you do. Like Bane isn't really anybody without these tenets and these beliefs. He's just some guy, really. So yeah, I think it's an interesting question. It would be they have people make these like AI videos or whatever now, like where like the Star Wars characters meet each
Oh,
other.
yeah, like,
Mm.
clips from the
There are,
past and stuff, yeah.
yeah, there are some where like Plagueis has met with Sidious after his killing to like shit talk him about everything he's got wrong, and I think that like Bane has talked to these characters, but I mean again whatever that is, but like you can kind of get like it's kind of interesting how accurate some of those feel. I don't know the level of work that went into it from the perspective of the fan who, rendered it or whatever, if any of it was actually written or if it's just all farted out by AI somehow. I don't know how that works. But some of them are kind of interesting. Like obviously just taken with a pinch of salt and they're just fluff, they're just there off to the side. But yeah, it would be interesting to see interactions like those gardened out. And you can do it with Star Wars because you can always get in contact with so and so's spirit. So it would
Mm.
be interesting to
Or at
get
the very least,
um
let's say Horcrux,
at the very least the
holocron.
holocron. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Horcrux is a very
Um
different thing.
yeah,
yeah, because you
no,
saw
but
it
I mean,
like actively with Darth Bane's holocron. Crate had it, and he
Mm.
didn't help
yeah,
him at all because he just thought this is the opposite of the rule of two. I'm going back to sleep. It's
pretty
like,
much, yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
But
uh,
anyway, so yeah, this bit concludes after in response to the lesson that Plagueis has been teaching, Palpatine offers up a recitation of a quote he found somewhere. He says, "What celestial body is more luminous than a singularity?" Sidious recited, "Hiding in plain sight, but more powerful than all." Plagueis grinned. "You are quoting Darth Guile." He goes on to compare the Sith to a rogue or malignant cell, too small to be discovered by scans or other techniques, but capable of spreading silently and lethally through a system. Initially, the victim simply doesn't feel right, then falls ill, and ultimately succumbs. That was Palpatine continuing the thought of what he read. And then Plagueis, I like the direction here. It says Plagueis locked eyes with him. It's like now we got something to talk about. After all, like the fluffy, bits of guff or whatever that I've been. Hey, this is dark side, something dark side. Here's something we can talk about. Right? Plagueis locks eyes with him. Plagueis locked eyes with him, rather. Consider the mindset of an anarchist who plans to sacrifice himself for a cause. For the weeks, months, possibly years leading up to the day he straps a thermal detonator to his chest and executes his task, he has lived in and been strengthened by the secret he carries, knowing the toll his act will take. So it has been for the Sith, residing in a secret, sacred place of knowledge for 1,000 years, and knowing the toll our acts will take. This is power, Sidious. Where the Jedi, by contrast, are like beings who, as they move among the healthy, keep secret the fact that they are dying of a terminal illness. I really, really love that description. I happen to think it's kind of harkens back to some of what we were talking about earlier with that feeling of sleepwalking towards the end and not feeling
Mm.
like you know what to do, but you know something ought to be done, but you just can't bring yourself to do it. Um, but then it goes, but true power needn't bear claws or fangs or announce itself with snarls and throaty barks, Sidious. It can subdue with manacles of shimmer silk, purposeful charisma, and political astuteness. Or consumerism. So there's that.
I love the use of the word
all
contagion.
relative.
Contagion fits perfectly this idea of the
Mhm.
grand plan. Like Plagueis is kind of sewing it that way, and that's how he views it.
Yeah.
I think it works perfectly for his character.
It feels like a natural carry down from like the masters immediately preceding his,
Yes,
because
as
we don't
well.
know
Yeah, the
much.
connection to Tenebrous for
Yeah,
sure. Mm.
we don't know much about Tenebrous' master, but we know some of what they were engaged in. It was like a biological weapon
Yeah,
that
they seem
ultimately
fairly
didn't
in
go anywhere.
lockstep in
Mhm.
mentality,
Yeah,
and obviously they have the choice of
yeah,
Plagueis and how they brought him about,
Yeah.
or Tenebrous did
I
anyway, is
yeah.
kind of in line with that as well.
It says chapter
yes,
15 stuff, but I do like how even in that moment, Sidious, like, points out, like, "Yeah, that plan would never work." You know,
yeah. We'll get to that soon.
the nature of it. Yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't that screw us? It's like, yeah, yeah. But anyway, he kind of like passes over that. Yeah, well, who cares though? Let's get back to what I want to talk about. But
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
and then just to close this one out, another thing that just seems to, a sign of the times here. Towards the end of the chapter, Plagueis paused to take the warrior's heart back into his hands. Through us, the powers of chaos are harnessed and exploited. Dark times don't simply emerge, Sidious. Enlightened beings, guiding intelligences, manipulate events to bring about a storm that will deliver power into the hands of an elite group. Willing to make the hard choices the Republic fears to make, beings may elect their leaders, but the Force has elected us. He glanced at his apprentice. Remember, though, that a cunning politician is capable of wreaking more havoc than two Sith Lords armed with vibroblades, lightsabers, or force pikes. That is what you must become, with me advising you from the dark. Are we grand enough? Sidious said. You should ask, are we crude enough? Plagueis quirked a smile. We're not living in an age of giants, Sidious. But to succeed, we must become as beasts. Taking a bite from the warrior's heart, he passed the blood-filled organ to his apprentice. I
That
really
wasn't
like
even the one I was
that.
talking about when I referenced earlier, and there's so many of them in these
Right.
chapters.
Yeah.
A little bit of
Yeah.
just ending the chapter on a little bit of body horror, because why not?
He
Yeah.
does tend to have people bite into hearts rather regularly, doesn't he? That happens in Tarkin for some reason.
Oh, I
But
forgot about that. Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, it's been going around as
And
well with
keep in
the
mind,
recent stuff with the
Plagueis is a
Dothraki things and
vegetarian. Plagueis
yeah.
is a vegetarian, but he goes the extra mile to make a point.
Yeah, that theatricality of this chapter. Yeah, because the bit I was referencing
Mhm.
before is from actually chapter 15, so we'll get to that later. But yeah,
Yeah, this
there's
bit
a
on
whole so
Cursed
much
and all
good stuff
this,
here
like, yeah,
and horrible stuff
there's
given the
something
times.
about the way he described this bit on the planet Cursed, where this screed takes place after they annihilate the warriors. Well, they actually only kill one, but they stun all the other ones, right, to shame them and prove their superiority and to drive like the social evolution on that planet. Um, there's something about the way he described it. I picture that one scene in the first Dune movie on the planet where like they're sacrificing like the emperor's warriors or whatever, and like they're bathing them in
Mm,
blood or whatever with the throat singing, the chanting. Like it feels really just stark and grim and kind of also beautiful, and despite being horrible, and like you know what I mean. There's just something really cool about the way he described all this. I really loved it. I would love to see this story executed in the hands of a director who excels with that level of
mm.
power over the visuals and the atmosphere of scene to scene. You said the
Animated by
Andor
the
treatment, but also like that.
yeah,
Yeah,
that, but
Yeah.
animated by the Old Republic trailer gang.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah. That would
please.
be amazing.
Yeah,
We can
incredible.
dream.
We
We
can
can
Yeah,
dream.
dream.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, that's the end of chapter 13. So let's get into the next one.
So, yeah, we transition from, Sidious about to take a bite from a heart to
Hmm.
taking a bite out of a steak. Very,
It's a
Perfect.
on the
Yeah.
beautiful
nose,
choice. Beautiful
little
choice.
fantastic. Again, if this was a TV show, you could
Mm,
imagine him, like, bringing the heart to his mouth and, like, right before he takes a bite, roll credits, and then immediately the next episode opens with him, like, maybe with, like, steak on a fork or just, like that.
mm,
Yeah.
Really well done. Very cinematic. And,
mm,
we immediately this is where we cut to we talked about earlier, this is where Palpatine we see Palpatine in his sort of persona as the ambassador to, Naboo and all of the things
Hmm.
that that entails. This is basically, we step again, the contrast is very interesting. We go from literally bloody, brutal Sith training world to, Ambassador Palpatine going through senatorial gossip, negotiating with, the people just in the general galactic sphere. This is also we get a lot of updates for just the general sort of zeitgeist of the the wider galactic commerce at this moment. This
Hmm.
is where we transition. It is interesting going from a relatively small scale to things connected to much bigger, but it is very smooth, so I appreciate that.
Yeah. The scene is at the consulate on Malastare for the Iriaduans. So it's not even like a directly impacting the Naboo here. It's just it's a nice bit of like using pulling from different arms of like the expanded universe here to create this meeting. But so
Mhm.
obviously it's the Iriaduan consulate. So you got people from Iriadu. Anyone who knows the character of Tarkin, your ears prick up. It's like, okay, who's here? And sure enough, his father is here.
Mhm.
But the fact that it's on Malastare means that you have a opportunity to rope back in Senator Team, who's becoming quickly one of Sidious or Plagueis's political enemies. He tried to undermine the deal on Naboo, for example. And he's doing this because he's standing in opposition to the gains that the Trade Federation is poised to make via Plagueis's sort of engineering. I don't know if we've ever expressed to people who might not know exactly what that's about. The reason for it is there are several reasons for it. I mean, the Trade Federation is going to be worked into the force that we see in the films where they have droid armies that can be deployed at their beck and call, and without the oversight of like the Republic, and for a Republic that has been demilitarized for a long time now. So
Mhm.
that's what they are. But beyond that, in the decades leading up to that, which is where we are here, they control. I can't remember exactly how many worlds, if we're ever told, but they control an outsized number of worlds. So if the Trade Federation, i.e., corporations, like in the U.S., like has gains voting privileges within the Senate, it means that these worlds, which are all subservient to their whims, will vote their way. And since they vote the way that Damask wants them to vote, it means they'll vote his way, which means he can
Gives him
position
a
the
lot of
galaxy.
sway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mm.
including choosing who the next chancellor is going to be
Yeah.
down the line.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say the next, a prospective chancellor when they're ready.
Mm.
You know, like only one of several possible gains. Then, like the control over galactic commerce and trade, and being able to create crises like the ones that we see with Naboo
Mhm.
in the film.
He
So
also
that's what that's all about. And the only reason why Pax Team doesn't like it is because he doesn't stand to profit from it. That's the only reason. You know, so,
yeah.
yeah.
This is
But
also we're introduced to Doriana, who's essentially
mhm.
kind of ends up becoming like one of Palpatine's like biggest confidants, both in the political sphere and in the, sort of underworld sector, doing a lot of shady business, behind the scenes and all that. It's nice that they establish, again, showing their friendship and just their sort of, dynamic and what's, built upon later because I believe was Doriana also someone that they considered moving into the chancellorship too, or am I getting my names mixed up?
I
Not
can't
sure on that
remember
one.
about that. He his family is
Because his family is very influential politically, and I
yeah, but I
thought
think
they
is he
mentioned that.
was he from Sutric? Was
Yes,
it the same planet that Bane was set up operation on like 1,000 years ago?
I think so.
So
Yeah,
I think just the wealth and influence. I don't think that they I know
maybe
that's the other reason. That's the other reason. Speaking of that point, though, that is the other reason why Team is sore, because
right.
when
He
Tenebris was
was
the
like
Dark Lord, he
full.
was there were talks about making him Chancellor as well. You know, and Plagueis decided to go another way for many reasons.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I don't think we're told very much about Doriana. I think he's mostly just there for flavor, you know, in
Mm.
conversation,
Right.
kind of.
This is also
But
where we follow up with Vidar Kim, who was
yeah.
we did meet him earlier, but like not
Mhm.
in like major capacity. Who's the current
Senator.
representative of senator, thank
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
Senator for Naboo, obviously, and this ties into, a lot of stuff going on that we see later in, like, the Republic comics and stuff with his sort of
Yes.
family
Uh,
dynamics and all that,
that's where he came from, is that singular issue, which is like a
yeah.
really amazing little story. But like Ron Kim, Vidar Kim, they only existed in that story, and it becomes kind of the second act, really, of this book. That's Lucino, just like,
Yeah.
you
Mm.
know,
Taking a
gardening a story
crumb
out of those little
and
seeds.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
One
planting it.
thing that I always found kinda strange about this opening sequence, and this could very well just be me overthinking it, but, like, they mentioned that so they already established that he was Palpatine's mentor in the legislative youth program,
Yeah.
that's all good. But then they
Yeah.
also mentioned that Ronhar is 7 years younger than
6.
Palpatine.
Yeah,
Sorry,
6 years. This has always bothered me. I'm with you on
but
this. Yeah,
but,
yeah.
like, the age difference, like,
He
it
messed up
that
the
doesn't
timeline. He messed up
yeah,
the
like,
timeline for
that
sure.
legitimately doesn't work no matter how you try
He
and square it.
He it's perfectly fine if you take out the line that he had known Palpatine for so long that Palpatine had watched his family grow to
Sure.
include 3 sons, and
Yeah.
Ronhar is the youngest of those. But yeah, there's no way that that makes sense. That's how that's the kind of thing that isn't like proofreading in terms of it's not going to catch grammar. That's where you need like the most dedicated kind
Yeah,
of
you'd
editor to help
need
you with that.
a holocron carrier
Yeah,
to be able to
yeah,
Yeah,
because
He is
for someone
himself the only
as
person who would
someone as
have noticed
ridiculous
that,
as
and he missed it
Lucino.
on this one. So
yeah, no,
cannot
I'm
blame
with
the
you on
Yeah.
that.
guy.
That's
He's
always it's only obsessives like us that are like gonna hone in on
Sure.
that anyway.
yeah.
But that's always annoyed me because when we did like versus stuff, I was like, how old is this guy? Wait a minute, that don't make sense. Like that's like yeah, I
Right.
absolutely I've always
There's
caught
always
that
going
and
to be
tracked that.
something
Like
that slips through
no,
the cracks, and this is a tiny one by
yeah,
comparison. But yeah, it is
yeah,
funny when you
Right,
notice
yeah.
those blips, given how seamless everything else usually is.
Yeah, and
yes,
it doesn't even make sense later on when he, like, refers to, like, even says to, like, Palpatine, like, "We're too close in age for me to have thought of you as a son, but I do consider you like a brother." It's like, well, wait.
yeah,
But
yeah,
he's only 7 but he's only sorry, 6
yeah.
6, 7-ish
6 years
years.
older than your youngest son. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
That doesn't make any sense at all.
No, no,
Like, so,
no.
again, I'm not saying it like it doesn't break the story or anything. It's just like it's weird to when you think of like someone as meticulous as Lucino, you would think that that
Mm.
wouldn't like fall through like that. So it's one of the
Hey,
few instances of like continuity hiccups in this book. So it's worth
yeah,
bringing up.
all the best authors make mistakes. I mean, George R.
Sure.
R. Martin
Mm.
talks about the fact that the fans have pointed out he has a horse that changes sexes between books. You know, it happens. It happens. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's
but
just it's one of the very very few errors doesn't break anything.
I'm
I
with
do
you.
also
mhm.
like the dialogue actually when he brings Palpatine over like to the table. He says, who knows, maybe some senatorial gossip will convince you to retire from politics altogether. I
If
know he
Yeah,
just
only.
means that as like some playful banter, but I like the character in that. He's like, this is some shady shit that you're dealing with, and if and from his perspective, he thinks Palpatine's a really good, honest man, and all that. So it's like, hey, I know you'll do a good job, but like, this is still some dark stuff that we're dealing with. I mean, they literally have a black sun Vigo in
Yeah,
yes.
the
at
mob
the dinner
boss in
table.
with them. Yeah.
Darnada,
But he's also the head of like a demolition, like deep space demolition. So it's like
Yeah.
yeah,
he's a legitimate businessman. So
Yeah,
he
and
has a
also
reason to
it
be.
flavors it or gives the excuse of why he's present even then because of the nature of the fact that they just had the podcast,
This
sorry,
is
pod
also
racing set up.
mhm,
yes,
So
and
there's
this
like the
Malastare
illegitimacy is
is
more tolerable here.
yeah,
mhm,
and again, this is like Star Wars world building. Like oftentimes it doesn't mean anything unless an author does something with it. But an author like this always provides that synthesis. Malastare is controlled by the Grand Protectorate, but it is the Dug homeworld. It was
Mm.
conquered by the Grand. So it's there's every reason for him to be here. Like he's a person of high standing in this society. So yeah, I really like that choice. I also like how little bits of this conversation they show how the seeds of what was going on at the gathering that was 11 or 12 years ago at this point have begun to bear fruit. You start seeing the fact that Gardula's clan is at war with Jabba's, in the background of things. You start, and that's a lot of it is because we start talking about the rise of Tatooine as a peer or rival or better than this. The Venta
pod
harvest here on
racing,
Malastare. Yeah,
yeah.
so it's like you start seeing the fact that everything that Plagueis was setting up earlier is coming, to fruition, which is nice. Um,
Also,
and then
very,
they
very, very minor thing. I like when Palpatine is talking to Pax and he says, "Oh, I enjoyed the pod race." Again, I know obviously we know he's like trying to like stoke some tension, but the fact that
mhm,
Palpatine used to be a race fan, it does kind of make
yeah,
you wonder like how much of that was him being honest. I mean, you
sure,
could read into that and come to some interesting conclusions.
sure.
Just
It's kind
saying.
of like this isn't like they're sitting in a boardroom somewhere or like in a government building. They're in they're coming out of like a box seat at this event kind of a thing, and they're just hobnobbing. So it's really he could be, he doesn't always have to be, evil, Sith Lord mode. That just becomes his nature over time. But
Mhm.
the whole point of being a Sith allegedly is that you're supposed to be able to enjoy your passions, right?
Mm.
Right.
So maybe he
The
got
big
something out of
lie.
I
this.
mean, we also,
Yeah.
we do learn that he's become a bit of a ladies' man. over
Yeah,
the
but he
years.
doesn't go anywhere with it. He gives the card to someone else because he doesn't
Yeah.
care. Like,
Mm.
yeah,
Which
it's
is also, by the way,
very.
not how that works, Palpatine. You can't just hand the card off.
I think
Okay.
it shouldn't be how that works. But this kind of thing. I mean, when you think about these kinds of people,
Well, yeah.
you're right. That's not how that works for moral people. But
Mm.
these are not who's in the room here. But yeah, then we have like a talk about just growing threat of the Trade Federation and how people will have different. No one has a particularly altruistic bent here. Everybody's just talking about the business side of things or like who stands to gain most. And when the senator from Naboo starts complaining rather vociferously about it, Ranulph Tarkin is the one who says, "There's my understanding that Naboo kind of became what it is because of this deal.
Yeah.
Like you've
Mhm.
profited it from it." And
Isn't everybody happy?
Kim's
It's like,
like,
well, not really,
"Yeah,
because the
yeah,
exploitation is still
well,
there.
yeah,"
Well,
because
like, from
Kim's
his
point is
perspective
it's made them very.
though,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, it
Kim's
makes
point is
sense.
it's made the world very wealthy, and but not as much as it should have. He says that if the contracts had been more fair, we would be as wealthy as Chandra-La. Like you know what I mean?
Mm.
So I mean like Mon Mothma's homeworld kind of. So I mean it is greed, but it's also like this vacuum of wealth is going to the top. Its trail to the top is taking it to the very organization you're all saying you want to oppose. So it's a problem whether you agree with my world benefiting from it or a
And
renegotiation or not.
And I
You
like
know?
that they've raised the practicality of it as well. Or do you want to subsume from that and then take over responsibilities of the scale of business that you just frankly cannot sustain yourself or even build up to? And like, no, we don't want that. We just want to negotiate the original contracts or renegotiate. I like that they spend the time just saying we're not just going to strike off the suppression from this external force because they can't. What they have now will not function without them. But just like grease the wheels a little bit and tweak it, and like you said, turn their own profits for themselves. It's very
I also
read the room kind of writing there. He knows who
yeah
these people are and what their
Yeah.
actual goals are.
Well, even
with
the
the
language you use is like, do you think the Trade Federation needs to be taken down a peg, so to speak?
yeah
So
Mm.
yeah
they're being very coy on it, and Palpatine in his answer is just very roundabout, like not really giving a direct answer, and like, but no one calls him out on it because of the way he spoke. Again, a good way of highlighting just how skilled he's become in this world, despite being the quote unquote new guy, so to
Mm.
speak.
yeah he's very skilled. Like, he does it perfectly because he's asked the question, and it's even the question terminates on the word ambassador. It says, "Do you agree that the Trade Federation needs to be taken down a notch, ambassador?" So it's reminding you that he is not yet a senator. You know what I
Mm.
mean? And so Palpatine glanced at Kim, who said, "Speak freely." Now he doesn't care about his permission, but you have
Mm.
to play according to the rules. You have to play your part. You're acting here, so it's like he has to pretend to be deferential here. Then he says some stuff, and ultimately he's kind of pressed on it again, because there's some back and forth that I won't read. But then Tarkin says, "So you feel that a defeat in the Senate might make the Trade Federation more pliable, as it were?" Palpatine vouchsafed a thin smile. "Only those bills that support well-reasoned regulation should win approval in the Senate." Well put. There's kind of like a here, here kind of from everybody, and he doesn't. Palpatine waited for someone to point out that he had offered nothing of substance, but no one did, and
Mm.
so it's sort of like the politicians are a victim of their own game, really.
Obliviousness,
Like you know
yeah.
what I mean? Yeah. So that works pretty well. He said even Kim failed to grasp he was being undermined. So his own mentor, who thinks he's just said something in a court, no. So
Mm.
it's very very well handled. I've always said like I think that Lucino's one of his many talents. He writes boring better than any other author. Unless
Oh.
we're talking Cloak of Deception, that's a different story. Something happened. He hadn't developed his talent yet. But yeah, just really, really good stuff. But then the meeting, at some point, Kim excused himself because he had a phone call, and then he comes back. He's like, "Oh no, my family's all been blown up." So
Yeah.
that's the
Well,
that's,
literally,
I know
yeah.
it's not. You
yeah,
don't mean that comically, but it is a bit of a humorous beat given from the perspective of Sidious, because we know he ultimately doesn't really care. But
yeah.
so it comes across like, oh my god, oh, and he's like, oh, there. You see, like, he actually physically embraces him, and it's like you can just see Sidious's eye. Like, "Meh, eh, eh, eh."
Mhm.
It's comical how people don't quite catch on to his true nature.
I like how then we have the funeral for the Kim family. I like the description of it a lot. It
Yeah,
says and
everything
how
that
it
Palpatine
yeah.
wasn't. Yeah,
Yeah,
Palpatine's
the
wasn't.
the funeral the funeral for the Kim family was everything it hadn't been for the Palpatines. Yeah, very much, because the whole thing had been a huge cover up, and we don't really look
Mm,
at that. We don't talk about that and all the rest of it. Really good use of the language. I won't read it all, but I also like the stuff that is true and does happen, but there's kind of like that. Yeah, so now it's this part. It says,
Right.
a procession 100 strong, led by the king, blah blah blah. They proceeded on foot. Yeah, yeah, where everyone spent a moment gathered around the eternal flame, contemplating transience and the importance of living a harmonious life. There's nothing particularly scathing about any of that, but it is just kind of like, yeah, just more playing the part. Just like let's move on to the next bit,
Right.
because it is tied to Palpatine's perspective. Yeah, we're all here contemplating
Right.
transience or something.
Right.
You know what I
But
mean?
it is
Yeah,
again, the descriptors do a really good job of just, like, painting the picture.
yeah,
You imagine procession going down and, you know what Naboo looks like, so,
yeah.
the way everyone's dressed and, all set up, not to be too morbid, but it's like, we do have visual representation for, like, Padme's funeral at Revenge of the Sith, so it's like we kinda know that some of the general traditions and whatnot.
Sure.
Also, a lot of the imagery is clearly, like, inspired for, Kim later on, Kim's funeral, with Ron
Hmm.
Hart from the comic and
Yep.
all that, like,
Yep.
continuity there. It is interesting too that this really was, like again, if I feel like if this was written by someone else, it would have been revealed that, like, oh, this was actually the ship crash was caused by, Plagueis and Sidious's meddling, but it just kinda comes off as just being random, which
I
is
don't
which is
think
kinda
it's them. It's the Naboo. It's the king and Varuna. They all but admit it. Like in this talk where Varuna says he's what does it say? Because
does he
Varuna's
really?
concerned. Hmm?
Oh,
Yeah,
go ahead.
well, I mean, he doesn't. In other words, he all but says it. He doesn't say it exactly, but he goes. At this point, is the governor of Theed. He's the king before Padme becomes queen, but
Mhm.
right now, because it's a couple of decades earlier from that time, somebody called Topolo is on the throne, and that's the person that Plagueis wheeled and dealed to get him there, right? So in the middle of all these proceedings, at some point, Veruna says, "A word, ambassador." And Palpatine excuses himself, and my heart goes out to poor Vidar. Like, you have to read it that way. He does
Oh,
not give
yeah.
a shit. Veruna began. He's roughly the same height as Palpatine. He wore. Oh, sorry, that's a description. We don't need that. A starship crash of all things. One would have thought that a tragedy of such nature might have compelled him to retire from politics, but that doesn't appear to be the case. So they did it,
Yeah,
and it's also
right.
they're on the take. They have a back alley deal with the Trade Federation, and so they were worried that Vidar Vidar has a somewhat principled stand, but again, he was motivated by greater profits for Naboo. But the line he was going to take publicly in the Senate was that of like the everyman, and this is wrong, and shame on them.
mm,
And they knew that, and they feared that their private deals with the Trade Federation would get dragged out into the spotlight when and if he did that. So for me, it makes pretty clear Varuna and Topolo did this of their own accord. They didn't take into account the wishes of Damask on this one. But
Yeah.
that then comes in. It's a nice bit where Palpatine kind of steps into his own as taking the onus here really as like the political driver here, because Plagueis isn't privy to this. He might be able to guess some of what's going on off on the skirts, on the outskirts of things, but he's not here for this.
Mhm.
But Palpatine's the one that says, well, if you think that a vote against the Trade Federation is what is needed, but knowing that it would piss off Damask, why don't we keep him apprised of the fact that all we're doing is playing politics? If we if we find an opportunity to just waste time without the Senate being able to like come to like a good conclusion of what to do, like a firm decision, our contracts won't expire, and we can stave off controversy and just kind of ride this one out a bit while giving the impression of doing things the way Kim wanted to. And all that, Veruna's like, I don't know about that, but he's like, what about Damascus? Tell him before we do it. He's not unreasonable. And that's when he's like, I'm gonna be king someday, and uh, it's too bad we don't. It's too bad we don't already. It's too bad there's already a senator, basically,
Mhm.
because Kim's not dead yet, and that's where Palpatine's like, well, my door's always open if the opportunity ever arises. So it's a really well handled
I'll
conversation.
graciously
But
accept
yeah,
it if it was
yeah,
thrust upon me, if I must,
yeah, yeah,
sort of
exactly.
way of speaking. Also, this is one of like Runa's things too is like building a space force for Naboo, which
Yes,
gets
because eventually he wants to rid the influence of the Munes from them, so we'll militarize ourselves and chase all the influencers out of here and just hoard Naboo's wealth and riches for ourselves. We don't need them. So yeah.
it is a little on the nose when he says, I've been assured that the fighters that I want to build will be capable of like taking on the Trade Federation. Like, okay, probably could have written that a little bit differently. I don't know. It just because it seems a
I'll
little
tell you
that
what.
Well, just the principle of
Normally,
a few fighters taking on the entire Trade Federation
I know
fleet
how
in
do you even
general is like, I
calculate
don't
that?
care how
Like,
good this fighter is. If you don't have a set of cruisers and destroyers and carriers and battleships, you're not going to get anything
to
done.
his credit, I mean, like they do succeed, but then again, that was mainly Anakin, not so much the rest
mainly,
of the fleet. So it's like, I don't know.
I mean,
Like, are they implying that Anakin only succeeded in that because of the ship? Not
It was a bit
the
clunky,
whole
but
scene,
yeah,
the whole seems dumb. This is the Phantom Menace we're talking about, but I
yeah.
mean that would normally bother me what you're saying, but it doesn't in this case only because the Trade Federation is the only group that's oppressing, not really oppressing them at this point, but the only one that
Mm.
is because they were more or less an isolationist planet for the most part. Like they were in the Senate, but they didn't have anything to trade like on this scale. So it's a new imposition on their lives. It's the mechanism of their wealth and their prosperity, but it's also the thing that
Mhm.
is
Sure.
threatening to choke them off. So I
Yeah.
can understand why
It's
he
not
would
so much the
reference it.
reasoning, it's just the way the dialogue is delivered. I would have said that, like,
It was
Tenebris,
very wink,
yeah,
wink, nod to camera,
yeah,
and in terms of how it came across, I
right.
for
completely
sure. Like
agree.
like like
Yeah.
when
Like
Tenebris says that we Sith are an unseen opposition, a phantom menace. I mean, it's full of things like that.
sure, yeah,
It's full of like, huh, kind of like writing here and there.
yeah.
But
Like I said, I
but
just would have, like,
anyway,
like him wanting the fleet wanting the ships, that's fine. It's just, like,
Mm.
I would have taken that line out about his experts saying, like, "Oh, they'll definitely succeed." Like, that I would have axed completely or just rewritten it.
Mm.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I can get that, but I like the final bit where they're talking about someday that'll happen, and Palpatine's like, I too foresee the day, and Veruna laughed again. Ah, but when? How long will we have to wait, Palpatine? Only until Higo Damask awards you the throne. It's nice because it's like he's like the kingmaker of our era, kind of
Mm.
a thing,
right. And he's just
and
saying that straight up as though
yeah.
it's which obviously it ultimately becomes.
Yes. Then we get so that's the end of that chapter, by the way. That by the way was called The Shape of His Shadow, which is a chapter title I've modified for something I'm writing myself. I really
Mm.
like that combination of words. But yeah, that was
Mhm.
the end of chapter
It is
14.
well, I
So
do think before we move on, I just wanna say one more thing.
mm,
This is also the beginning of, like, the, conflict between, Vidar and, like, Ronhar because he brings up the fact like, "My family's dead, my only chance for my line in the future is Ronhar," which is a direct cue up to, the story of that comic, and
yeah,
Mm.
he
the ship in his
eventually
character is, like, immediate, which makes sense
yeah,
because it's also that way in the comics, so, again, just
yeah.
good setup for that.
That
It's
was a
also
that was
interesting too in that same sequence when he says to Palpatine, it's like, he's my only chance to continue the Kim line, just as you will
mhm,
one day carry on the Palpatine line. And like Palpatine doesn't even like react to that in the
Mm.
slightest.
yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
saying a lot with a little.
Sure. But yeah, like that's like peak Lucino because you actually do see the lines from the comic ported over into like Pestige's report of like he said what was the word he said and then he took like progenitor like the weirdest word like it was it was straight from the comic because Kim was all like Jedi like I acknowledge you as my progenitor Senator Kim but like it was like what was the
Mhm.
word he used progenitor like just so like that was like Lucino just he
Yeah.
references everything like every
Mm.
It,
iota of it
it's
but
even more perfect when Pesty is just the one delivering that, just in his
yeah
gruff, what is he
yeah
saying? Like sort of
yeah
stuff.
that
Perfect
was
delivery.
weird.
Yeah.
Oh wait, was he the one from Sutric? I can't remember. Like, was it him or Doriana? But it doesn't matter. That's nerd stuff. We can look that up in the background. Comment on that. Like, show us all the
Yes, yeah,
know-it-alls in the
show us that.
comments. Yeah.
There you
But
go.
anyway, that's the end of chapter 14.
Moving on to chapter 15.
All right, and finally, the last chapter we're going to look at, Quantum Being, chapter 15. This chapter has some good stuff in it. I also think that this chapter shows signs of being possibly a later addition that was like slapped into this book in some spots. Like some of the stuff in here could have happened almost at any other time, and it just felt like it feels a bit messy, and ideas got like shoved in at the start of this chapter, just to give it just to make sure that they appeared at all. Otherwise,
Mm.
there wouldn't be tee ups for other things that do happen later on. It feels like it's had editors, hands in it saying, add this, take that out. What are you even saying here? There's abrupt scene changes that don't really have much to do with each other. There's the
Mhm.
occasional line of the prose even that is just really bad. So I think that this was either written in a hurry or was kind of like ham-fisted, like kind of meddled with after the fact, and it's just not a. It's probably my least favorite chapter in the whole book. That doesn't mean it's terrible though, because this is a talented author, right?
Mm.
But
Mhm.
so this is quantum being.
I think
I
it's the
mean,
chapter that, like, most feels like you can feel like the pen is, like, behind the characters per
yeah,
sequence. Even though it's very well
yeah.
written, like, the purposes are very, like, blatant. It's like, "Okay, this is said so we could set this up. This is said so we could set this up." Like, "Oh, this is introduced because this is gonna be important to this thing later
Mm.
on."
The
So
It
title,
doesn't
the,
help
the
that it's
the
coming
title of the
after 3 or
chapter,
4 chapters that are so seamlessly transitioned
really
between as
good.
well.
yeah.
Like,
It's probably the
it's
least subtle out of all the chapters
yeah,
in the
it's very
book.
jarring compared to the rest of it. If it's just been a standard Star Wars book chapter, then, great. But it's the fact that it's coming out of this very well put together holistic piece that's just sort of, it doesn't really fit anywhere quite by
The
itself.
the the chapter title only seems to have anything to do with the opening salvo, and the rest of it is
Mm.
just whatever. But this is the chapter in which Plagueis is screwing around with the midichlorians of a Yinchori, trying to understand how to work the Force. Then you have um, the introduction of Darth Maul as a baby being given to Sidious
No
for
one
more or
needed
less no reason,
ever. That was the
and then
weirdest thing. I've forgotten about that part of the book, or not forgotten about, but how
yeah,
like just abrupt and in your
how
face it
bad it
was. I
is.
was
Yeah.
like,
It's like, "Oh, I'm
Jesus.
on Dathomir now."
Yeah.
and then uh and then it terminates with a meeting, in sort of the at another gathering, which is a better portion of the book and sort of like a nicer note to end on. But the reason why we shoved this one in, because we were initially going to just stop with chapter 14, but chapter 15 has, it's just awkward. It feels like a poor choice to begin the next round of chapter discussions whenever we
Mm.
do them, so that's why we're doing it today. But anyway, so just getting into the beginning of it, what do we have to say about the stuff with the Inchori?
We talked
I
about
mean,
just before the
well,
start of
first
the
of all, like,
recording that he does a lot of legwork to try and make midichlorians make sense while also
Mhm,
making them not make sense.
mhm,
It's kind of having your cake and eat it situation where he's saying, okay, in world this is how it works, and there are exceptions here that mean that anyone who hates midichlorians, you can kind of lean into the exceptions and just think that they're not really required. So it's kind of like,
mhm.
here's the function, but you don't need them for the force to be what it is and what it used to be. Have whichever one you prefer, lean into it as you choose. Which, through the lens of Plagueis and particularly what he's trying to achieve on a scientific level, I think that was an excellent choice. It's just,
Mhm.
if you don't care about midichlorians and think it was a stupid idea in general, then you don't need this. He's doing legwork for people who care about
It
this part of the law and how it
Mhm.
fits with the rest of the world. So kudos
Yeah.
to him for doing that, and he's the best author to be given that job. Did a good job with it, but I just don't care. So it's like, okay, whatever, moving on.
Yeah, I like how the language, like you were saying, weaves in, like, the scientific side of it with, like, the more spiritual,
Hmm.
force nature of it, and it's also I mean, it's a nice follow-up from, way back when the favor that the Inchori for representation in the Senate. Also, his ability to control a Yinchori is very impressive in and of itself.
Hmm.
It's a good evolution of, not only his just raw power, but just his overarching, philosophy and his development of what is ultimately going to become his, midi-chlorian, manipulation
Hmm.
abilities. It's in and of itself, like, the tee up to that is nice in the way it's presented. But again, it's like, if you're not with the fundamental idea of it all, like you were saying, Callan, like, none of this really does anything differently that would probably sway you, in my
Yeah,
view, either.
it's just a progress
Um,
progress point, right? It's a, hey, look, he's had 10 years, he's advanced this far. Look at the progress he's making. It will justify the advances he has later on, and the heights he reaches. So it's like, you need to have it, and it's done really well in the context of trying to make midichlorians work. But it's just artfully, in terms of excitement
The
for it, or this is a really cool scene. It doesn't have any of that
Yeah.
flavor or enthusiasm if you aren't personally really invested in making midichlorians work, which most people
The
won't be.
line that the line that always bothered me, that just made me go, "What are we even doing here?" was when he said, uh, I won't read the whole bit because it doesn't matter. But it says, like, ultimately the end of this experiment, it concludes on this revelation. It says, "This suggested that the Inchori was actually strong in the Force, despite his pitifully low count." of midichlorians, right? So I mean, it's like the discovery had come as a breakthrough, and Plagueis was still grappling with the implications, and so it's sort of like saying, "Well,
Midichlorians are irrelevant.
what?" Yeah, yeah,
Or at least
and
midichlorian count rather is irrelevant.
and again,
Which is
he spends like a lot of words, like 2 or 3 pages, trying to explain what he means by all this. But to me, it's just kind of I don't know. It's silly. I do like. I can't remember which of you said it just now. It might have been Evan. I do like the way in which he expresses the implications of being able to alter a being's like core fundamental nature or personality through this technique. To me, the midichlorians, whatever. Like, I've seen people say, like in like forum posts or whatever, that they read this book and although that they appreciate Plagueis's like take on the dark side and everything he had to say and just how skillful and knowledgeable he is, they didn't feel like the idea of the midichlorians was fleshed out. And you have a chapter that's pretty much all about that. But I understand exactly what they mean because it doesn't really mean anything and it's circular. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So it's very very. It's just an idea I wish the book didn't have to contend with. If it could just be his mission was to subvert the will of the Force and undo the fact that all living things eventually die. Like, I mean, you didn't need to. It doesn't need to be couched in midichlorians, but it's a taste thing. Some people really like them. I don't know why. I don't get it, but they do. But for me, it's just these lengthy tangents always just feel like they want to be about something simpler than they're allowed to be. You know what I mean? Like to me, yeah. But I do like that the idea of compelling a murderous Yonchori to turn into a peaceful being, and how like that he goes, well, if I can do that,
What
it's not
can't
just
I
life
do?
and death.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's everything.
It's
You know, it's like
dominance.
so I
It's
like
the
that.
purest
Person
expression
to
of
become a
absolute will,
murderer.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is very Sith-like in just a way of thinking. And also, like, to your point, Matt, like, too, it's like it feels like you can I think there is a version of this where this could work, but in order to do it, you would literally have to go, like, full science with the language and just this general structure, explain everything from just, like, the pure scientific perspective, and that would be very difficult and, not,
yeah.
like you were saying,
There's
like,
an
everyone's
audience.
sensibilities that wouldn't really appeal to, and again, it just goes back to the fundamental nature of, like, the overarching idea is just kinda flawed because they were never explained well. It's like
There is an audience
you
for
can only
that.
do so much, really.
Yeah,
Mm.
there's an audience for that, but I think it's somewhat dwarfed by people who, I mean, the Force is magic. You can talk about it however you want, but it is magic. And so at a certain point, people just have to understand. It's like it's like when you have like the X-Men or whatever. Like, I mean, you can get into like the X gene or whatever. Like, you can talk about why they have the powers they have, or like what the mutation is. You can couch it in scientific lingo. But at the end of the day, Gambit charging up, cards that blow up with kinetic energy, and being more agile, and having like a hypnotic charm because he's just so sexy. Like that combination of
That's
powers,
actually his power, like you
like
said recently. I love it.
yeah, it's just like there's only so far you can go with trying to take
And
that seriously.
totally,
It's like trying to explain like what gives a vampire their vampire ness. You know what I mean? It's like it's a magic. It's not
Yeah,
real.
you can play with
Whatever.
the convention. You
need
can
it.
dive into the lore of it as a framework for storytelling. You can say, okay, this character finds a science of what makes vampire fascinating, and he's looking at it through this lens, i.e., Plague is looking through midichlorians. And you can make that. You can engage with the concept at that character level and make it and exciting and enjoyable. But that kind of thing, first of all, it appeals to only certain types of readers. It doesn't appeal broadly to everyone, so you can't spend too much time on it, no matter how well you do it, unless you're really niche with what the story is and what the genre is.
Right.
Or it's like competence porn stuff, right? It's this, people who really like military stuff will like that. People who really like science stuff will like that. People who really like assassins will like the way a sniper rifle gets put together. You can spend 10 minutes describing it, and people will love it. But it's not something that the broader reader is going to like. So you have to, just by its very nature of what you're covering, skim a little bit, and you can't then get as complicated and convoluted an idea as midichlorians across any better than he does here, I feel.
Yeah.
It's just not going to work.
I always liked the biological like geekiness of like what the alien species are like. That's fun to me because you're not trying to express in science a fundamental like just mystical element of the story. You know what I mean? So, but anyway, I didn't mean to talk at the same time. What were we going to say, Evan?
Yeah, I was just following on. Like, it goes back to that. Like, and like I remember, like, people ask this for ages, and in a lot of ways still do. It's like, without the midi-chlorian explanation, why doesn't everyone just use the Force? It's like, well, that
The
doesn't
Force
matter.
is
Like,
strong in my family. That's all you needed. It's like
Exactly, like, that's not
there's
the point
some
of the
kind of
story.
like through line genetic component. That's all we needed.
Right.
That's it. It was
The reason
explained.
the reason everybody in Star Wars doesn't use the Force is because if that was the case, it wouldn't be Star Wars. There's your
Yeah,
answer.
and it
Like,
just wouldn't work.
that's not the point. It's like, why doesn't everybody in Marvel have the X gene? It's like, it doesn't matter. Like, that's because that's not the point.
Mm.
It's like, you don't
It,
need like
it's
George with the
in
explanation,
yeah,
unneeded.
yeah. In some ways, I think it's just like you can you can you can do the work of trying to understand like a genetic component here, but ultimately, I mean, the reason why Anakin exists is because he is a result of the Force striking back. He's an
Mhm.
expression of the will of the Force. That bloodline is strong in the Force because the Force wills it to be. There isn't like at a certain point you can't science your way into it.
Mm.
It's just the way it is, and it could be as simple as the Force forsaking. I mean, that's what the Yuuzhan Vong were. The Force had forsaken them. You
Mm.
know what I mean? At a certain point, it's all just about the will of the Force. That's what it's reduced to, and that's
Mm.
why this would have worked perfectly for me if it was just about subverting the will of the Force, gaining the power necessary to do that. And midichlorians are the instrument by which Plagueis is charged with doing it because George Lucas wrote it that way. But it could have been really anything. The most interesting bits of it are just the outcomes. It doesn't really matter how he gets there because it doesn't really make. He himself is like talks about the competing philosophies and theories and histories of what the Force even is. I don't remember if we got into it on camera or off recording, but like the Celestials, like that's kind of viewed as like a cosmic sort of permutation of this same war that we as
Mhm.
organic beings, sentient beings, finite beings wage, and it's even down to the cellular level, like with the
Mm.
midichlorians, you know. So it's just kind of it's all three or four different ways of expressing the same ideas, really. And the only
Right,
interesting things is the choices that people make, you know. Like,
right.
and yeah, that's all. Most people, I think, get like we ourselves just got mired in the details, but we meant to be. It's a topic of
Right.
discussion. But the
Mm.
fact that
Trust
that would
me.
distract somebody from understanding what the point of a Star Wars story is pretty sad. So, like, I don't know. I don't understand that.
Yeah, it is what it is. But yeah, about as far as this sequence goes, does anyone have anything else they want to point out before we
Not on this
move
one.
on?
No,
So
not
we
Not
just
on this
particularly.
one.
abruptly cut to Sidious on Dathomir because why
Yeah.
not? He runs into a Night Sister witch who is able to recognize him somehow.
Yeah,
Um,
so he's walking through
and they,
some street for some reason. He meets some person for some reason. They recognize him for some reason. They bring him more for some reason, and then he for some reason takes
yeah, like, so I
takes him.
have
It's
this
This is
like,
the
baby.
mark of bad writing.
yeah, I was gonna say
The
there's
So I
no
have
question
this
reason for any
baby.
of this.
when the question is always for some reason or for no reason or why did they do this, that's a bad writing. Like that's bad writing.
Yeah, the
There's
cosmic
a line
odds
in
as
here
well
that
of
I
her happening to come to this market and meet the one person in the entire galaxy that isn't a Jedi that could help her. It's like this is ridiculous. She's like, oh, a
well, I
force
mean,
sensitive. It's a
she
random
okay.
stranger.
I really feel like this chapter was. I think that this was done maybe not under protest, but certainly it wasn't his idea. I mean, it goes so far as to point out that it's not an Iridonian Zabrak, it's a Dathomiri Zabrak. It's like
Yeah.
that wasn't a thing before 2008's Clone
Right.
Wars iteration. Probably it wasn't that year, but that series is what ushered in this change, which is always ironic because the Zabrak didn't exist before Darth Maul. So the same thing happened with
Yeah.
the same thing happened with Ventress. You know, she was a
Mm.
Ratataki and then she became from here. It's like, but you created that race for her people. It's like, yeah, we don't care. We're doing our own stupid thing. It's like, well,
Yeah,
fuck you
yeah,
then.
yeah.
Like that was always my attitude. It's like, why should I
Right.
care about canon if you don't? You know what I mean? So like
Mm.
I don't have to embrace a story just because it's considered canon. But
Yeah.
It did
Also,
feel
in
like
this, like,
editorial
there
mandate, though, like you say. I
yeah,
feel like he
editorial
put this in
mandate.
because of that, and
yeah.
also
So this
because he's
is
him, he tried to
yeah,
make it tie in and work, which he did a good job
yeah.
for
Yeah.
in that context.
Like, this is essentially Maul's mom, essentially. I
Mm.
guess
Well, yeah, yeah. I'm
they're also
confused
kind
by
of
this.
implying well, they also imply that, like, I guess that she had 2, so, like, I guess they're implying that Maul and Savage are twins?
I was gonna say, was
Yeah.
there a dead like a twin who died off screen, or is it the being that Sauvage becomes? Because there was another brother, like in his, he had a younger brother. That was how he was introduced, right? Like he was
Right.
trying to
His name was,
protect.
like, Pharaoh or something?
Don't ask me. I just remember
I
he
don't
was there.
remember.
But
Yeah, I don't know.
it. I don't know. It's a messy story. But there's a line in here, like when they first meet, he can tell he's being watched.
Mm.
This is to me a sign that it was written in a hurry. It says Palpatine moved to the square's diagonal corner to observe her. She was eyeing individuals in the passing crowd, not as if searching for someone in particular, but with a gaze more in keeping with target acquisition. She didn't strike Palpatine as a thief or pickpocket. though she did exude a dark energy informed by equal measures of urgency and deceit. So we're just getting everything, like all the
Yeah.
shorthand, like he just knows all this. And then it says, abruptly, he made himself discernible in the force. To get this over with, I guess. Let's see where this is going. And
Yeah.
immediately she turned her head in his direction and began to hurry across the square in his direction. What a poorly written line. Like you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's just that's
There's
so out of
a lot of
character.
cracks, yeah, for
Y-
him. And also on
Yeah,
top of that, he's being watched. Has a sense of being watched, but no one's watching him. It's
yeah,
like the force is giving him
exactly.
spider sense. Fine,
Yeah,
but reworded
exactly.
that way,
Right. Like,
it's just it
I get this
feels
is the Night Sister, but it's like the connection is very,
yeah, it feels very rushed out. Like you say, like editorial mandate wanted Maul in it, stick Maul in it because Maul is
Yeah.
he's fractionally in the rest of the story anyway. Like he's very kind of disjointed in how he integrates moving forward from this.
I understand the need to introduce Maul, but it's the
Yeah,
fact
and
that
I
he was
get that.
tethered to this,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Like it just feels very much like they
Always
forced it in
hard.
this way because we want this to be connected to
Yeah.
the series we're telling at the same time. Especially considering that was about the time when Maul was becoming a lot more relevant again in the
Also,
Clone Wars series.
it really I know retcons are a thing, and this is all old news, whatever. And Star Wars has been beaten up and bloodied over the years, much worse than this. But it establishes that the baby already has the infant or the tattoos. I mean,
Mm,
who tattoos a baby? That's number one, and B, they were Sith tattoos. All the Sith tattoos that were ripped off came from like the popularity of Maul's image, and now it's
yeah.
like, what are those? I mean, it's
Right.
just like I don't know. I
Dathomiri,
just
like kind of offshoots of it done, but
It
it's
doesn't
just you
it
don't
just
need to
doesn't
we even
make
had
that harder.
we even had a
The reason
previous
was
story where you
people he
saw them
wanted
being
he wanted
applied
to
by
beat him over the
Sidious.
head, beat readers over the head with that. This is Maul, guys, until he said the
Yeah.
actual name, which
Yeah.
is no
No,
longer
see, his
now
name is
Darth
Maul. Like
Maul.
his
Yeah,
name,
his name is just
his
Maul.
his
His
real
name is
name is
Darth
Maul.
Sam
Yeah,
or Darth
yeah.
Bob,
Which
Yeah.
again,
which
and
is also
this
fine,
is
but it
like
has to be done well.
I again, we just said you don't want to take things too seriously. We just had a whole thing about it's at the end of the day, the Force is magic. We don't need to take
Mm.
everything seriously. I always thought it was embarrassingly stupid that there was a character named Savage Opress. But like, I mean, so his name was going to be Maul Opress or something of that ilk. Like, I mean, like it's a Sith moniker. It's Darth Maul because it
He
was
mauls
decided that that
people.
name
That's
fit
his
him.
nature. Like
Also
Darth
also they
Scarl and
just
Darth Syphilis
they
and Darth
Yeah,
Plagueis and all of this stuff.
yeah.
also they just hand wave like, "Oh, where's the dad?" It's like, "Oh, dead by tradition." I was like, "Okay,
Sure.
well,
Yeah.
just throw that away." It's like,
That's just
yeah.
a complication we don't need to go into, I guess. And,
I
and
know,
and
but
also just the
it's so
setup
lazy.
here,
It's so
like the
lazy, I'm
setup
sorry. Like,
is
that
like,
like, what
where
is
is
that?
Palpatine? It's a farmer's market.
Yep.
It's outside. It's knockoff goods, airsats jewelry, and bits and pieces of junk. He's out there with Uncle Owen, is he? I mean, like, what is he doing here? Like, it's such a
Couldn't go
lazy.
to Korriban because that
It,
was too
In his
tourist
Apprenticeship.
heavy. So he had to come
Yeah.
here where the real secrets could be found. It's like okay, right,
Oh, yeah,
and this is
seriously.
all
oh,
fine.
That's
This is fine framing, but just if this was a 2 or 3 chapters of the book and it was part of the story and it had somewhere to go and it wasn't just like let's go, gotta get more, gotta get more, gotta get more, it would be
yeah.
fine. But
right.
because it's not, and it comes across as just flying by the seat of the pants and just
Well,
there
yeah.
for its own sake. We've got to get through
Well,
this.
they
Hurry
even
up.
established that he has a hunger for like dark lore, so it would make sense in the context of like as it's presented, like, oh, I'm gonna go to Dathomir because
More
maybe there's
interesting
things I can
location.
learn.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
exactly.
Like, yeah.
That's all you need.
Like
That would be
a more targeted reason, like you're saying, for having come here with that in mind, because it is just, oh, I'm just here browsing around the nearest marketplace.
Yeah,
Maybe they got something
but
creepy and weird,
also just in
yeah.
the
Yeah,
context of how he gets Maul as well. This is his going to be his. I mean, he never saw him as a full apprentice, obviously, but this is Darth Maul, his first
yeah,
apprentice that
sure.
he trained. You're
Pretty
taking
much,
all
yeah.
the agency away from Palpatine in the sense that okay, he didn't go and steal Maul. He didn't go and acquire Maul, like train me an apprentice and give him to me when he's like 6 or something. He didn't. This isn't a choice by the character. It's just. Oh, I guess I have a baby now. Now I have to decide what I'm going
And
to do with it.
literally,
And the
the
idea that he's
reason,
carrying this baby off, like Darth
yeah,
Sidious is carrying this baby off to then get taken care of short term and then trained later on, all while he's
and
doing everything
the
else.
reason,
It's just
the
silly.
reason for it is he says, "Why single me out among the crowd of more richly attired beings?" And she says, "Because you have the look and bearing of a man of intelligence and influence." She gestured broadly. The rest are rabble, despite their fine cloaks and headwear. First of all, it should have been the rest a rabble, period, not the rest of it. The rest of that ruins that completely. But it's literally she just thinks he looks intelligent and influential.
Like, hey,
To
I tried.
take the
Like,
baby, and he challenges her, like he goes, why do this? And she says, well, I want one. This is one of a clan pair, I think she said. And she says, or half a clan pair or whatever. And she goes, I want this one to live freely since the other cannot. Now, if they are twins, why are they not aware of both of them? Yeah, I guess we don't need to go into it. Maybe there was just, we assumed there was one child and the one came afterwards. But
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter that much. But the point being, he says, isn't it servitude of a different sort? And she doesn't challenge that. She doesn't say, yeah, but,
Hmm.
it's just, she just says, take him, please. Yeah,
And he does,
take
and
him,
then
save him,
I will, yeah. Although I
I
do
don't know,
like
yeah. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I was about to say, like, the one bit of writing I do kinda like is when, like, so when, they part ways, Palpatine gazed at her and motioning with his right hand said,
Yeah.
"You will forget this encounter." She locked
Yeah.
eyes with him. "I will try. For your own
You know,
sake, I hope you do. Now go,
so
before I change
was
my
that
mind."
a
I do.
was that a
That's
failed
kind of
attempt at
interesting.
a mind trick? Did he
Yeah,
That's
fail
how
by
I
to
always
Darth
interpreted
Sidious
it.
of all people, and he didn't think that was a loose end that needed tying. It's like
Yeah.
someone who
That's how I always
knows him
interpreted
by
it, like, he
face
tried
and that he's a Force user of like not Jedi dark origin, and he's just going to go and become one of the most recognizable faces in the galaxy with this person knowing her. Yeah,
I don't
she's
I
going to
mean, she
remember
is
the
a nice
person
sister. I mean,
she
she is a
handed her
nice
baby off
sister, so,
to.
like, I can sort of buy why the mind trick maybe wouldn't affect her
Sure,
in the
but he
No, I
doesn't
get that,
ruminate
but I'm
on
just
it. He
saying that
doesn't
when he
linger on it.
recognizes that, he's like, I guess that won't bite me in the ass. Like, she could point
Yeah.
out, like, excuse me, Jedi Master Sir, I handed my baby off to this guy on Dathomir once, and he's registered as a like a dark Jedi, not non-Jedi entity, and he's like, oh yeah, we should look into that. Like that's a glaring issue if when he considering he knows he wants to
right,
be the Chancellor later on. But like Matt said, that's just nerd stuff.
yeah.
But it is a problem with
And
the
she
scene.
never shows up ever again, so
Yeah,
it's
of
like it's
course, yeah,
completely
never to be
redundant,
seen or heard from ever again.
Yeah.
It's
Mothers in this book really have a bad time of it, don't they?
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
a weak scene in a weak
Now
chapter,
that I think
and
about
again,
it.
it does
Yeah.
feel like editorial mandate to even be included. Like I get more coming in later on. He had to be present in some way to make the timeline fit, and it's a good choice based on the canon connections he's making. But it's just this was not. I can feel this. Would not have chosen to do it this way. Had he not
Yeah.
had someone
Yeah.
else
Yeah.
interfering.
Yeah,
Maybe
But
we're
for
wrong.
thankfully
sure.
when
Maybe it
that
was just an honest mistake on his part for once. But it seems too substantial
yeah,
particularly given the previous 4 chapters and how fluid they are. I mean, the
yeah,
whole book.
yeah. But, like, thankfully after that's, over and done with, we get back to a section between, Plagueis and Sidious which has a lot more going for it, which is them at the
Mm.
gathering. Them
Yeah.
basically just sitting, standing atop a cliff as the gathering's going on, being evil. But, you know,
It's also funny because so Palpatine played this pretty smoothly in his meeting with Varuna, where he said, "Well, let's tell him about the plan and make it clear that we're not actually subverting him; we're just appearing to."
Mm.
And he says he's not unreasonable, but Plagueis is described as being unusually annoyed.
Yeah.
So it's like he does go along with what Palpatine's saying. I think he recognizes it to be the wise course of action, but he does not wish to. And so this is one of the few areas where I think they did a good job of setting up what they later, I think, failed to capitalize on with Palpatine being the quote unquote true mastermind behind everything.
Mm.
I don't think that he earns that at all in his final speech. I just think that that's crazy since a lot of this stuff was being put into motion before before he ever met Plagueis.
He just tweaked
But
it.
yeah, but bits like this show him to be maybe the more competent player of the actual political game and knowing when it suits you to look like you're taking the L even though you're not. But Plagueis says, we will not be denied. And like Plagueis was saying with unusual annoyance, we will have our way in the Senate, regardless of what the Grand Protectorate, Black Sun, and the rest wish to see happen. Let the beings of the Hydean Way and the Rimmer trade route worlds go thinking that the Trade Federation is seeking to tighten its grip on intersystem commerce. The real danger in seeding the Federation's client worlds will emerge when the Senate ignores the needs of those worlds and disenfranchisement begins to spread through the mid and outer rims. Then the Republic will reap the whirlwind, and we will harvest the benefits. He exhaled in disgust. Pack's team and the rest aren't acting out of concern for the Republic, but out of fear that their entitlements might disappear if trade shifts to the outer systems. Half of them sit in the rotunda only because I want them there. So it's like you can see what this is him having like a little self-therapy session, like, "I
Mm.
really don't wanna do this, and I'm better than this, and damn it, but yeah, okay."
He doesn't
When
like when the cogs and
Palpatine
gears that aren't
yeah,
working
Yeah.
towards large
yeah,
machine. He doesn't have the
yeah,
flexibility and resilience that Palpatine has in
yeah,
this specific
Right.
yeah,
arena. You know, that ability to, oh, the plan's going off the rails. Let's grease the wheels. Let's reorient. Let's work around it. And he's just like, well, they shouldn't be going off the wheels because they're my wheels and I own them and I put them there and they should work perfectly. It's that
yeah.
scientist, my invention isn't holding together kind of situation. Whereas Palpatine
He
doesn't
then
think that way.
His frustration in the face of like unexpected failures when he's put so much into setting these pieces up.
Again, hypocrisy
yeah,
of the Sith.
yeah,
This is
and he's also
adversity. You're supposed to thrive on this, aren't you? It's
but
like,
he's also
oh.
like what you that's a perfect segue into, it's like half court tennis or something. It's like that's the game he wants to play. Use people, subvert them, get rid of them when they no longer serve the purpose. It doesn't. He's so offended at the idea that others want to do that to him, because that's
Mm,
what Varuna's idea is. Varuna's like, okay, the mutants played their part. Our world's on the rise. We don't need them anymore, do we? Let's get rid of them. Ultimately, them in the
mm,
Trade Federation. Let's ultimately get rid of them and just take over the business for ourselves. And it's our world, isn't it? Um, so you could look at it very very easily from Varuna's perspective,
mm.
but
Mhm.
he goes, as for Varuna, because this is like he's brought the idea here,
Yeah.
and he's just so salty about it. He's like, you should encourage his plans to amass a space corps to defend Naboo against the Trade Federation. When we make him king, we will lead him by the nose into a morass that will appear to be of his own making. So it's like, how dare you try to play the game against me?
Yeah, I'm
I'm
going to
like, you're
particularly
my next,
spite you
yeah,
now. Yeah.
yeah, but I'm going to make you king first because you have a
Yes.
part to play.
Yeah.
You know, but it's all but he doesn't understand these people are only playing the same game he is. Like, why is it such an alien thought to him? It's just he doesn't like being on the losing end. I gotta understand that. But he's
Mm.
not thinking of it in that way, in that Glockta way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he's not he's looking at it from his own selfish perspective. He hasn't got the long view like he normally does, which
And
is
and
out
it's
of character
such
for him.
yeah, and it's such a
Yeah, and
beautiful
and
character
that
flaw
drop
as well because it's intentional on the writing. Is that he's not like, oh, he's stepped out of character for a moment. It's to show this is the kind of one of his flaws of his ego and his hubris. But
That
also,
leads into your bit here, though. By the way,
yeah, no, I know. I'm teeing that up in
the
a
next
second because we'll
bit,
get there. That's
yeah,
the
okay,
spine curdling paragraph that comes in a moment. Yeah, it goes back to like what I was saying before about Plagueis' kind of personality and the fact that his this very intentional character flaws that are written in by Lucino, that he can't accept that the rules of his game apply to other people in the same way,
yeah,
and that
yeah,
I didn't design you this way. You're not supposed to do this. Don't do that. That rebellion, which is again, it's an enjoyable character flaw, and not like a step out of character, because we know that this is someone who's very concerted and very concerned about trying to take control of people's will. He just in the previous chapter we're discussing, or earlier at the start of the chapter rather, we're discussing the fact that he can now dominate Yonjori. He's getting to the point where he can literally just command someone to alter their very being in his, not image necessarily, but in his to be what he wants
according
them
to
to
his
be. Yeah,
design.
according to his design,
Yeah,
exactly. Which again goes back to the whole midichlorian design and the scientist within him. He is someone who lives and breathes control. Sidious is as well, of course, but he does it through coercion and manipulation, and he engages with, as a character, the kind of manipulation of other people on a personal level. Like, I'm going to poke you here and pull that string there and maneuver you there. We talk about it in other books. He's going to create scenarios where no matter what happens, he wins. Plagueis is like, no, we're going to do this, and it's going to work out. And then when it doesn't happen, he's frustrated about it.
yeah,
And it just speaks to I mean, this is true in real life. Like, you surround yourself with people ambitious people. They're gonna take whatever opportunity they can
Exactly. Live
to
by the
get
sword,
ahead. And
die by the
obviously,
sword,
I mean,
kind of thing.
well, yeah, I mean, and like Sidious in this book is the most obvious example of that, because it was his ambition that ultimately led to Plagueis' death. But even this is like just a microcosm of that right then and there. In fact, even you can see Palpatine kind of seizing on this thought process and using the opportunity to kind of like insert some of his own little manipulations in there when they get into the following conversations about just the Jedi and how to bring them down as well.
Yeah, and you see as well the narrative kind of seed of, okay, this is how Sidious gets to the position where he thinks he needs to take over as master, and where the things he's alluding to in that final chapter are being referenced here, on a smaller level. I'm better than you because this is one of your flaws, kind of thing. Not being, well, sometimes being completely oblivious to his own flaws, of course, but that's every person of his type, and particularly every Sith. But we get past this, as Matt mentioned, and reach that spine curdling paragraph of just horror that makes me think, oh my god, we're Star Wars is more relevant now than ever has been, with the real life that I wanted to read. Because following on from what you just described previously, Matt, we get Plagueis kind of looking out over this crowd of evil gathering, like you mentioned before, Evan, saying, Plagueis lowered his gaze to the courtyard. The climate begins to shift, Darth Sidious. The body politic begins to show signs of contagion. That reference again. It's the way he sees the world. The re-emergence of anger, hatred, and fear signal a loss of faith in the Force.
It started raining as you were reading this. Oh
God. Thunder and lightning.
Yeah.
The light is waning, pushed into retreat by
Mhm.
dark matter, and the universe begins to seem inimical rather than comforting. In such times, beings are wont to look for solutions in the enactment of harsh laws, the ostracism of strangers, and warfare. Once the Republic has fallen, the Jedi are but a memory, and beings have nowhere to turn to but us. We will provide them with a sense of stability and order, a list of enemies, weapons capable of decimating entire star systems, durasteel prisons in which they can feel secure. He gestured to the courtyard. Look how they hunger for the dark. I mean, I listened to that today and I was like, oh my god.
Yeah.
Can we not? Can we
Like we're
steer
saying-
away from that, please, people? Can
Like
we
were saying
wake up?
about, history repeats. History,
It does.
things
The wheel
come
just
and
keeps
go.
on turning, as they say.
Yeah, things repeat, and again, it's pretty on the nose, and what he's saying can be applied to really any point in human history. I mean, if we're being honest,
it's
at
always
various
been
points.
true, and it's more true than it's been in
Yeah.
a very long time now, and that's not fun.
Yeah.
That's not something that's where we want to be.
For
It's also-
sure.
Yeah, and obviously in universe, teeing up the degradation of just the wider galactic, community, and why so many people were so willing to embrace the Empire, because again, it's like, I mean, we make fun of like Palpatine's like declaration in the novelization, but the whole safety, security, justice, and peace thing, like there's a reason for that.
That speech, as every year passes, gets more and more acceptable. Like back in the day, people were like, oh my god, I mean, how on the nose can you be? What are these idiots doing? I mean, seriously, this is ridiculous. This would never happen. And it's like, oh god, apparently the bar is lower even than this. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
Well, it was because like the joke of it was somebody who looks like death saying it's the Jedi who did this, the Jedi, and people were just like, really? And now,
it's
I
okay,
mean,
sure, why not? Why not?
sure,
Yeah.
really,
Straight
you
up.
tell them anything. You can literally tell them anything.
Yeah.
I mean,
but-
you can again. We'll keep this grounded in Star Wars in a second, but we just had somebody who was killed by an assassin, like honored at a funeral that in which somebody said, "The president is here, who God protected from an assassin's bullet." It's like, and there was a crowd cheering for. It's like, how tone deaf is it? Whose funeral is this, and how did they die?
Were
You
they
have
not
somebody
God's chosen as well? They're not
Yeah,
good enough. It's
talking
just,
about forgiveness, and then the president comes and says, "No, I don't want good things for my enemies." Really? So and a cheer coming from it. It is really
Thunderous
scary
applause.
stuff. And yeah, and so it's frightening, just like the lack of credibility people prove to have sometimes when you want to afford them more, just out of human decency, on just automatic basis. Not met you before, I extend you a certain amount of credit. No, a lot of these people are really proving themselves unworthy of that. It's really, really hard to see how we get going towards a brighter future. But anyway, he concludes just saying, where he says that they need to demand the attention of the dark side to aid us in dictating the future. So it's like we have to be on lockstep, and we have to gain ownership of the Force. We have to make ourselves attractive to it, and all the rest of it, if we're going to equal the Jedi. And eventually, he's talking about the escalation to full-blown war. And Palpatine says, "Well, the Jedi won't sit around and do nothing." And Plagueis is like, "Well, their time is coming. The signs are in the air." And he talks about like a lot of the things we've already spoken about today and in previous talks. But this is where they mention the failed scheme of Tenebris and his master, by the way, where he says that they wasted years attempting to create a targeted virus that could be deployed against the Jedi, separating them from the Force, as if there was some organic difference between the practitioners of the light and dark sides, as if we communicate with the dark side through a different species of cellular intermediaries, when in fact we are animated by the same power that drives the passion of these beings gathered below. Target midichlorians, and we target life itself. And so he's reading that from his Plagueis perspective, like
Mm.
all up in the midichlorians, and Sidious is just like, an attack of that sort would fail regardless. The Jedi are widely scattered, and it's unlikely that we would be able to act quickly enough to kill all of them in one instant. So he's thinking about it from a
Mm.
practical side of like, how do you
Practical,
assassinate this
political,
many
yeah,
people?
Right.
tactical,
Yeah,
strategic. But
yeah,
also, I like the fact that that's a more elegant way. I mean, we talked about with the wink, wink, nod to camera kind of situation with the
sure.
Nubian starfighters earlier, Evan. This is the well handled version of that, where he's like, okay, he's talking about the early ruminations of the Order 66, and okay, how would I pull that off? It's a nod to that, but it's a lot more. He's not outright stating that we'd need to assassinate all at the same time with this particular coup. Oh, I know, let's create a clone army and get them into a fight, into a war. It's you just see the thought process that leans him towards that ultimate plan, coming into the fore here, and I really like that.
Yeah,
Because
There's a
it's a
back and
genuine
forth.
problem.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
go
again,
ahead,
like
Evan.
that back and forth you were saying, like again, very Shakespearean and the sort of the debate style of the writing. When Palpatine brings up like, yeah, they need to be felt from within. They need to be perceived as the enemies of peace and justice rather than the guardians. And
Yes.
again, that's very like the that punctuates like just the entire point of the whole thing, and it's the way that's teed up is really nice too because you can also say that this follows up on from Plagueis' frustration and in the sense of, with, Varuna being king and all that, like, yeah, we're gonna lead him into a Varas of his own making after we put him on the throne. And you can also see that as somewhat being justification for why maybe he didn't see some of that betrayal coming that eventually sprouts from all of this as well. It's like, oh yeah, that's his thought process. This isn't me being manipulated by Palpatine. He's agreeing with me in a weird roundabout sort of way. The book never spells it out that way, but that is one way you can interpret it.
They
Mm.
it's a fun back and forth because they're talking about the resources that are at their command, the things that the Jedi have going for them, and the things they don't. They talk about like the weapons that are being developed by some of the very people here at this gathering, and the whole thing is Palpatine's like, are we meant to use these weapons against the Jedi? And then it becomes sort of like, well, how do we get rid of them without turning them into martyrs? Like that's kind of like, and I like that comes after the moment of revelation, though. Like Plagueis decides that we have to take great care must be taken not to turn them into martyrs if we want the galaxy to turn their backs on the Jedi. But
Mm.
what gives him that idea is Palpatine, and that's where you see Palpatine's like he's the one that says, as you said, Evan, the Jedi will have to be felled from within and made to appear the enemies of peace and justice rather than the guardians. And Plagueis repeats that. It's like the enemies of peace and justice rather than the guardians. It's like, so that's where he starts going, all these things I've been building up, we can start moving them in that direction. And that's why it's more fun, much more interesting, frankly, than Palpatine came up with everything. Because
Mm.
it's him who's established a relationship with the Kaminoans. It's his wealth and his influence that has all these people in positions where he needs them at this time. It's him who came to Naboo with the idea of turning it into what it's become, based on information that Palpatine leaked, not because he had ambitions to take over the galaxy or become a secret Sith apprentice, but to spite his father. So I mean, it's very it's just much more interesting, frankly, that one guy didn't do it all.
Mm.
But you
The
do
collaborative
see
element
here,
shows you that the
yeah,
difference between motivation and
yes,
opportunity.
you do see the spark of revelation coming from the younger one in this, where I think Palpatine, if the book had had more moments like this, I would
Mhm.
understand Palpatine's rant at the end where he takes
Mm.
credit for everything.
Would have brought
As
it
it
a lot.
is, no, not at all. But this is a bit of ammunition that I won't take from him. He did
Mm.
come up with this. This
Yeah.
this was his notion. So
This
yeah,
also leads into Plagueis, telling a story about his first ever solo mission for his,
Mm.
for Darth Tenebris, his apprentice.
Yeah,
He basically got invited to a dinner party, for name, dang
Santi,
it,
Carrot Santi.
Carad Sante, who, way earlier in the book, they established, had some history with Tenebris and Plagueis, and now we get the full context of that. Essentially, Plagueis got invited to a dinner party, even though Damask Holdings was still, in its infancy, and the special that night was this thing called bloat eel. Essentially, I mean, pufferfish
I was going to
in
say, yeah, very
Yeah,
clear
real
that was
life.
supposed to be what
You
it's
know,
referencing. Yeah.
yeah.
basically, yeah, you have to prepare it a certain way, otherwise you could get poisoned. Again, like in real
That's
life,
the
you can
yeah.
eat, you can get pufferfish, you could eat it, but it's going to be risky, and you have to be very
Mm.
That's
skilled at,
that's that's part of the drama, right? That's what they
yeah,
say.
exactly.
Like that's the reason you order. It's like, haha, do you dare? But
Nothing
That's
livens
one.
up a dinner party like the prospect of near instantaneous death.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really like this story and what he's saying and the point he's making and why he's saying it when he's saying it. But that bit there, just as the aspiring author that I am, like wanting to write my own stories, and trying hard to do it. There's one bit in this that annoys me because he teased that up. He says, "I was seated at a table directly across from him, and the menu specialty that night was bloat eel." And he says, "Have you ever tasted it, Sidious?" As a teenager at a gala hosted by House Palpatine, then you know that the creatures. You were supposed to say no so that I could
Yeah,
explain what it was. Like you weren't supposed. Like,
exactly.
it's he very clearly just wants to the theatricality, which if you want to read it that way it works. But really to me it's just like he knows what it is. You don't then need to go on an expository screed about what a bloat eel is, which he
Yeah.
does. He does because of course he does. So just that I would say no. Palpatine could just say no, and that way you could get this. And he could also feign interest in the story. I think that would be fun too, because he doesn't.
Mm.
What does he really care?
Right.
But yeah, that's
And
always
that
bothered me a
subtle
little bit. But he
reinforcement of
says,
the fact that,
"Yes, I
oh,
know
by the
exactly
way,
what
I'm
this
still
is."
capable of choking you out without anything you can do about it. A little reinforcement of the nature
Yeah,
of the
that
relationship. I love that it's
that's
not
not the
Valiant.
like it's
point.
not overtly the point of that, but it's a subtle kind of, oh
Yeah,
yeah, that also happened.
they all do that.
Yeah.
They all
Yeah,
do it.
trying to establish
Yeah.
and
Even
like
when they're not the full
them and
master, Dooku
Fourfinger
does it to
together.
Ventress, for example.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, because like after he mentions the prospect of death that the bloat eel can cause, like Calvin was saying, he puts his thumb and forefinger together and he force pinches Palpatine's throat for a brief time, and he literally says like, "Oh yes," just so you get an idea of what he was experiencing. I'm paraphrasing that,
Yeah,
but
just to
basically.
add some immersion to my story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But then he doesn't do it for very long, but he lets go and but he continues on with but then I kept the pressure on, and essentially he just talks about like that was his first murder,
It
and
Mm.
feels almost like it's a
solo.
revelation that you can use the Force this way, because you would think. I mean, like, why would he need to illustrate it? Only then I kept the pressure on. It's sort of like, did you know you could do this? Kind of a thing. That's how it feels to me a little bit. Like the idea that Palpatine would be this far in his training and have never heard of a Force choke is funny. But
Mm.
I mean, when I think about like how his family was killed, he kind of like ripped them to pieces or bludgeoned them or whatever. It wasn't as targeted and as subtle as this could easily be. I mean, Vader always walks into the room like like that. But I mean, it's
This is
what
one
he's
move.
describing is like the assassination version of it, and you do it very you know quietly and silently, and you don't draw attention to yourself. So I think maybe it might be a little bit like what you guys were talking about a bit earlier with lightning. It might be like, here, this is the approach you take to these sorts of things, and if you didn't know,
Mm.
this is how you can do it, or like this is the way you can wield the Force. So I'll give it credit as saying it might be the first time Palpatine has been on, certainly on the receiving end, but might be the first time he's been aware that you can use the Force that way, or made
Yeah,
aware, because
and
he's still a young
he
man.
takes
He's only
this.
28 while this is going on.
Mm.
This is young Palpatine. It's not Palpatine as we think of him at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he takes this very, very, very personally,
He'll
as
never
we
forget it.
yeah.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
you
It's
wouldn't,
again
but
blindingly
yeah.
stupid move by Plagueis, but again, this chapter's
Well,
kind of
again,
showing
all
his blindness and his
Sociopath's
weakness,
gonna sociopath. You know what I
I
mean?
know,
It's
and
like,
like,
Indeed.
and if
there's
you
no
get
bang.
upset at this,
I just choked you.
literally, like Matt was saying, most
Yeah,
most Sith masters do this to their apprentices at some point. So it's
they
like,
Yeah,
do.
most Sith Martyrs don't want to be partners with their apprentice, though, in eventuality. Oh, and the whole
yeah,
co-chancellor thing. I always find that funny. It's like, you'll be chancellor, but then you'll appoint me co-chancellor later on. I was like, okay, come on. And I'll still, while being appointed co-chancellor, a public official, be directing you from behind the scenes in the shadows. Like, how's that going to work, mate? It's like you are a blindingly optimistic fool when it comes to Palpatine being your partner.
He's the exception.
There
No
are
one will
potentially
dare subvert him.
I
He's
know.
Plagueis. Don't
They're
you?
all feeling their exception, but the fact that he thinks he's the exception in the way he does is just always amusing to me. Because
That's
it's not
why. That's why. Even though you always dog on Bane, he at least was a realist.
Oh
He
no, I
knows how
give him
this
that.
game is
That's
played.
again, I give him that. He was
Yeah.
earnest.
Yeah.
Honesty, and being genuine was not the problem with Bane. That's for sure. It was just the hilarity of how he reached his conclusions in the first place. But he stuck by them, and you got to give him credit for that. Yeah, Plagueis just I don't know what he's on. He's very strange.
There's also a line here that I've always kind of raised an eyebrow as when he's talking about like the post assassination. He says, "Much later, we learned that Sante's body had been placed in carbonite
Uh-huh.
freeze, and that all of his internal organs had been replaced by vat-grown ones. The
Yeah.
surgical teams may have been successful at restarting, restarting his body, but the Carad Santhe they had known was irretrievable. What exactly are they implying there? Because like I feel like you could take that a few like
I was,
are they basically implying that they took all his organs out, gave him new ones, froze him, and in an attempt to resurrect him, or is that like
yeah. I mean,
the way that was
wasn't. Am I wrong in saying that this is like a rumor about like Walt Disney or something? It's that don't you remember that episode of Batman the animated series where the rich guy wanted Mr. Freeze to make him immortal without realizing
Yes.
what that would mean? And he had like the mustache and everything. I always thought that this was some kind of like urban legend about Walt Disney had this done or something.
like
Maybe
frozen.
it's a common trope among like the wealthy elite circles. Is like I don't want to
Cryo
die.
freeze me,
Like
yeah.
I've got everything materially, but I haven't got everlasting life. So let's figure that one out. Which is Plagueis. So yeah, I think it's very clearly they tried to without the Force do everything else possible to body hop basically, and it didn't work. But they give it the good try. I always I like that they said that they may have even been successful at restarting the body. So he came back, but he was brain dead, or you know what I
Yeah,
mean. He
or
was
there's implying
right.
some kind of soul aspect with it, with the Force having, I took his soul, not took his soul, but killed his soul, that kind of aspect.
More or less, yeah,
Which
yeah,
for him being the scientist and the midichlorian obsessive that he is, then that kind of fits the
Right.
character.
I guess
yeah,
so, and I guess you could tie it to like because he mentions like way earlier in the book too that like there had been experiments in like absolute transfusion between midichlorian rich blood and non midichlorian rich blood that he that
yeah.
that, that were just that we don't know what happened, but like things went horribly wrong. So
Yeah, he said that things had gone horribly awry without going
Yeah.
into details. But he wrapped that up in the idea that he said midichlorians seem to know to whom they belong, so
Mm.
you can't work your way around that one. But yeah, it's a nice chapter end for what was a interestingly
Weird
messy
chapter.
chapter.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, the final crescendo basically is like when Plagueis says that they need to position Sidious in a higher plane to finally go on to their next phase, and him becoming a Senator Palpatine and eventually Chancellor Palpatine. And he initially thinks that in order for them to move that they need to get rid of Senator Paxtine,
yeah,
but I guess it's like, well, he may still have some uses. We're gonna hold off on that. That totally won't bite them in the ass later. But and then we end on the crescendo. Like, no, I was thinking Kim, Vidar Kim, and that's
yeah.
kind of
Well, it's also nice because we later find out that he does this because he really wants to test Palpatine.
yeah.
Palpatine doesn't give a shit about Pax team. Why should he? And he wouldn't usurp his seat in the Senate anyway.
Mm.
He knows that he's close with Senator Kim, but he
Mhm.
couches it. He doesn't say that. He does not say that. He keeps that to himself. He wants Palpatine to work that out for himself, and it is a Sith-like manipulation. But he does say, may yet prove useful. I'm referring to Senator Vidar Kim. His sentiments have made him a liability. More important, his death will allow us to position you where you've long yearned to be, which is a really nice use of the language to express
Mm.
that.
Mhm.
And it's kind of a way of saying, this is your fault almost, even though I'm telling you to do it. It's like I
Yeah.
know you want this so badly. Like, it's like a refusal to kind of own it. It's interesting how honest and dishonest he is. Throughout the whole thing, and I think he views the lies of omission and the points of dishonesty as ultimately rather harmless, like that little force choke that doesn't mean anything, that, like, kind of a thing. I think that's the mentality there,
Mhm.
and
The
coupled with his
sociopath
other.
and the psychopath kind of not
Yeah,
coming into alignment the
Absolutely,
quite
yeah.
way he
Again, the
yeah,
thinks they
blind
should.
the blind spot that ultimately ends up becoming his undoing.
yeah.
Mm.
It's
Mhm.
also like, isn't it sad you won't have the same satisfaction at seeing your assassination target succumb for you? It's just like the things he thinks about. Just
Yeah.
weird brain. But
Mhm.
yeah, really a strong ending to what was a strange chapter, I have to say.
Mm.
Mhm.
But I don't know when we'll look at more of these, but I think we can go ahead and commit to doing the whole book, pretty much from uh, just working our just working in our slow, steady rhythm. We'll get to
Yeah.
the next round when we get to
We'll
them,
get
pretty
there when we
much.
get
But
there.
Yeah.
yeah, it's an
But
awful
we're
lot of
enjoying it.
fun,
It's the
and
important thing. Yeah, we're
A lot
yeah,
of
enjoying it.
content
It's
for
cramming it all out in a
sure.
quick session. It would drain the fun from this experience. So yeah, it's
Absolutely.
good to be able to do this as and when we want to. We hope you guys are enjoying. This has been our analysis of these 4 chapters, 12 to 15. Let us know down in the comment section down below what you thought of them. I'm Callum. I still have an outro.
I always forget how this goes. Am I next?
Yes,
Sorry
you're
about
next.
that.
That's practically your outro at this point.
All good.
Yeah.
Evan Nova 95. We hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you guys later.
Goodbye.